Time opens. Take a slow breath and dim the lights. Tonight we'll stroll, softly, in order, through the entire Gravity Falls timeline, from founding myths and secret journals to Weirdmageddon and that quiet bus out of town. The pines will whisper, the river will hush, and a certain triangle will flicker at the edge of the story like a mischievous star. Before we begin, tell me, who's your favorite Gravity Falls character? The Curious Dipper, Unstoppable Mabel, Gruff-Hearted Stan, Star-Eyed Ford, Roof-Sure Wendy, Sunshine Sue's Redeem Pacifica, Scheming Gideon, Brilliant McGucket, Noble Waddles, or the deal-making Bill himself. Drop your pick and why. Hold that name in your mind. We'll meet them under the pines as time opens. Tonight we will walk slowly. We will not hurry the past or chase the future. We will simply move through it, like a lantern drifting along a quiet path. The light small and steady. The trees patient and tall. If your breath wants to go softer, let it. If your eyes want to get heavy, that is welcome here. There are mysteries ahead, but they do not bite. They only glow a little, like moss after rain. The place is a valley in the far northwest, where roads thin into gravel and the map looks like it shrugged and left the rest to the forest. The air smells like sap and riverstone. Owls speak across long distances. There's a bell tower that is never in a rush and a museum that sells strange keychains and even stranger stories. Tonight the valley will speak in order, the way a careful librarian reads labels on a shelf. We will start where there were hardly any names for things at all. We will end with a bus pulling away on a late summer afternoon. Someone waving, someone saying, "See you soon," and the pines holding the echo like a promise. Between those points, there is a thread. You might picture it as a chalk line drawn across a blackboard, or a whisper that learned how to smile. It comes and goes, winking in the corners of dreams, teaching, teasing, untying, tying. If a thought had elbows and liked to lean on them, if an idea could step out of a triangle and talk, it would feel a little like that. We will not say its name loudly. We will let it float at the edge of vision, a golden hint that keeps showing up when clever minds are tired and the veil between worlds is thin. The thread does not own this story. It simply weaves through it. The heart of the story belongs to a town and to people who choose each other when choosing is hard. To follow the thread without getting tangled, we will go in a gentle order. First, the unmarked years, when the land itself seemed to breathe and the sky wore strange weather. Then a town assembling itself out of timber, pride, and parties. Then two brothers who wanted the same shore and reached for it differently. Then a summer that opens like a book and refuses to stay on the shelf. Then the day the sky bends, and the nights afterward when people sweep sidewalks and remember one another's names. No leaps, no shocks, just one step after another, the path always visible in lantern light. If you hear the river as we go, that is normal. If you hear pages turning, that is normal too. Somewhere a journal waits with its corner peeking from under a board. Somewhere a statue forgets how to move and is content to listen. Somewhere a shop sign creaks and the sound means home. Somewhere a pine cone falls softly and the forest makes room. We begin before the museum, before the bus, before the twins and their sweaters, before the rift, before the wheel of symbols, before the town decides it is a town at all. We begin at the dreaming edges, where the rules are still being introduced and time is not yet sure which way is forward. Take one more easy breath. Feel how the night is wide but kind. Let's step in. The oldest stories whisper that there were places where the world got thin, the way ice gets thin near the reeds. People walking at dusk would find themselves pausing without knowing why, as if the air had tilted and the path wanted to turn one way more than another. It did not feel dangerous. It felt like a thought that almost remembered itself. In those thin places, the angle of a branch could look like a sign. Triangles showed up without trying to be triangles, in the spacing of stars, in the cut of a stone, in the way light fell through a torn cloud. Some said the shapes were nothing. Some said the shapes were messages written by the sky. Most simply went on with their day because the bread still needed baking and the fence still needed mending. But the shapes kept showing up, as patient as moss, as patient as time. If anyone had put words to the rules then, the words would have been simple. The first rule, ideas are alive in certain weather. The second rule, dreams are doorways that prefer to be knocked on politely. The third rule, bargains can sound like compliments. On warm nights, travelers would fall asleep beside a fire and wake with a crisp solution to a problem that had bothered them all spring. On cold nights, people would dream of a room with no gravity and no walls, with shelves made of light and laughter drawn with sharp lines. They would wake amused, brush snow from the sill, and get on with the day. No one wrote the dreams down. Not yet. Creatures moved at the edges, not terrible ones, not kind ones, just old shapes that have learned how to be quiet. They watched people before people learned how to watch back. They learned our footsteps and our songs. They could be seen if you softened your eyes and looked slightly to the side. Children were good at seeing them. Dogs were good at seeing them. Grown-ups saw them most easily when they were tired and happy at the same time. Somewhere beyond the sky, if beyond is even the right direction, there was a place with no corners that stayed put. Lines did not behave there. Colors argued and recombined like schools of fish. If something could be amused at gravity, it was amused there. If something could get bored of order, it got bored there. Call it a mind realm. Call it a lawless neighborhood. Call it a room that refuses to have a floor. That place learned the taste of curiosity and found it delicious. Sometimes on those thin nights, a curious mind in our valley would turn in on itself like a seashell and listen. In that curl of listening, a voice might arrive, as smooth as ink and as bright as a spark under glass. It praised the mind for being sharp. It offered suggestions the way a friend might pass a note in class. Wouldn't it be interesting, the voice might say, if one could look between the frames of reality the way one looks between pages? Wouldn't it be useful to lift the corner of the world and peek? No one drew a contract. No one shook a hand. An idea simply slid into another idea and both of them smiled. It felt like discovering a shortcut that had been there all along. It felt like finally guessing the name of a tune you have been humming for months. The valley changed as thoughts changed. Trails appeared where feet kept wanting to go. A flat rock became a meeting place because it was flat, and because someone said so out loud. A circle of trees collected rumors and made them heavier. If you carried a story into the circle and whispered it, and the story came out warmer, like bread from an oven. This is how places get fed. This is how places learn. The river stitched the edges together, whispering in summer, muttering in spring. It did not care about triangles, or perhaps it cared in its own round way, arranging pebbles so their gaps made shapes, smoothing driftwood until it pointed. Water teaches patience to everything it touches. There were nights when the stars flickered as if laughing. There were mornings when mist cut the valley into ribbons, and each ribbon kept its piece of the world as if guarding it. There were seasons when the first mushrooms came up in tidy patterns and seasons when they sprawled in reckless joy. The valley could be neat. The valley could be wild. The valley could be both. No journals yet, no labels, only a place in the process of remembering what it is. But the mind realm kept visiting. The voice kept getting bolder. The compliments got sweeter. The suggestions got sharper. If you drew the voice, you would not need many strokes. A line here, a line there, an eye, a wink. You could draw it in the corner of a page, and it would look back at you from the corner, pleased to be noticed. It admired cleverness the way a collector admires rare coins. It admired ambition the way a storm admires tall trees. It wanted a door. It always wants a door. In the valley, somewhere under roots and rock, the fabric that separates things thinned just a little more. Not torn, not broken, just willing. The world sometimes does that for bright minds and for patient places. It opens a seam, not to trap them, but to see what they will sow. Time listened to itself and nodded. The story could proceed. A last look at the edges before names arrive. A fox, stepping across a logging road and pausing to blink at the first post, hammered into the soil. A cloud shaped like an arrow just before it dissolves into nothing. A child collecting 3 perfect pine cones and leaving them on a stump like a crown. The valley does not announce beginnings. It recognizes them and smiles privately. Now we will add people who call themselves founders. We will add dances, ledgers, lanterns strung across streets. We will add the soft noise of a town practicing being a town. And the whisper in the corner will practice too. Before any surveyor's line snipped the map into squares, the forest had its own grid. A loose one, made by habit and light. Deer used one set of paths. Wind used another. People learned both. A path to the river with a shallow lip for buckets. A path to a set of hot springs that knew how to say yes to tired bones. A path to a ridge that made the stars feel close enough to touch. None of these paths had signs. None needed them. When you have walked away often enough, your feet remember, and that is better than paint. The stones were there first. In fields, in creeks, in circles that did not ask for attention, they held their positions with quiet authority. Some were too neatly stacked to be an accident. Some had lichen patterns that resembled letters from an alphabet no one was teaching. People told each other that the circles were older than the oldest cemetery and younger than the first story, which is another way of saying the circles were exactly as old as they needed to be. In late spring, a cold rain would tap the cedar roofs, and the smell would be so clean it felt like starting a notebook. In summer, the dust would lift behind wagon wheels and fold back down like blankets. Autumn would toss colors around with both hands. Winter would take all those colors, blanch them, and keep only the feeling. The seasons did not ask permission. They knew their choreography. There were nights when lights moved through the trees that were not lanterns. They were softer than flame, slower than lightning, curious as cats. Sometimes they hovered above creek crossings as if helping. Sometimes they vanished when sung to. Children named them. Adults pretended not to notice, and then, when no one was looking, left a saucer of milk near the door because not noticing and being polite can coexist. Old trails have a way of guiding new plans. When the first rough cabins crept in from the edges, they landed where the ground felt cooperative. Good soil here, a view there, a windbreak just right. No one was mapping a town yet. People were mapping mornings. Where will the sun hit this porch? Where will the smoke go if it turns suddenly? Where will we be happy to watch the rain? The answers were practical and tender at the same time. Music helps a place settle. Fiddles appeared. Someone brought a piano over a hill in pieces and put it back together with stiff fingers and a grin that did not go away all winter. Dances drew lines between families that would become streets later. What is a grid but a memory of hands choosing each other? What is a town but a rhythm that repeats until it starts to feel like home? Stories settled, too. A woman swore she heard laughter from under a bridge when she dropped her basket, and when she went back to fetch it in the morning, there was a sprig of something green tucked into the handle that had not grown there the day before. A boy placed 3 pebbles on the porch at dusk, and in the morning found 3 pebbles and 1 perfect feather. A pair of brothers chopping wood paused when they noticed the chips falling in a pattern so tidy it felt premeditated. They looked up and saw no one. They looked down and saw the pattern had rearranged itself while they were looking. They shrugged and went on chopping. Some mysteries prefer shrugs. They grow better that way. The bell tower began as a need. You cannot shout the hour to everyone at once, and sometimes the woods swallow voices and return them in funny shapes. A bell is simpler. A bell is democratic. The first bell was not the one that stayed. The first cracked on a cold morning and went silent out of respect for the weather. The second bell arrived on a cart that looked too small to carry it. When it rang, the sound threaded the trees and set them at ease. Bells make promises even when they are only telling time. Somewhere between the second bell and the first borrowed piano, a man with careful hands noticed a stone with 3 corners, too perfect to be an accident. He set it by his door, thinking it looked interesting, and a strange calm took hold of his sleep. He dreamed of a room without gravity. He woke with a design for a better saw blade and drew it on the table with a stub of charcoal smiling. He did not tell anyone about the floating room, not because it scared him, but because it felt like a joke he was still learning the punchline to. Triangles gathered. Not many, not obvious. A wind vane here, a keyhole there, a quilt pattern that ticked just a little brighter than the others. The valley kept doing what valleys do, marking time in rings under bark, moving water from cloud to ocean, sending birds away and welcoming them back, giving foxes places to disappear when they needed privacy. If anyone asked the valley what it thought of the new cabins and the hopeful gardens and the sudden interest in square corners, the valley would have said kindly that it had seen many kinds of straight lines come and go, and it would see these through with patience. Around this time, people began to keep track, not only in their heads, but in books. Births and barter, weather and weddings, the price of nails, the number of wolves heard near the ridge, the day a stranger with a suitcase of jars came to town and traded lightning in a bottle for 2 blankets and a story he told for free. When humans start stacking paper, the future tightens its belt. It prepares for a name. The name would come. Names always do. But first the parties. First the nights when lanterns were strung in long, forgiving arcs between poles and trees, and the whole clearing looked like a low galaxy. First the laughter that put a shine on the new wood. First the small arguments smoothed by pastries, and a second cup of something warm. Community is a repetition of welcome. People practiced. At the edge of the clearing, just outside the ring of lantern light, something that loved cleverness watched the practicing. It was not impatient. It had time enough for many parties. It had time enough for a lifetime of ledgers. It admired the bell for the same reason it admired puzzles. A clean tone, a clean solution. Under certain stars, it could lean forward and almost taste the moment, when a certain kind of mind would say a certain kind of yes. But that yes would be years away still. For now, there was the fact of a valley arranging itself without offense into homes and paths, and a bell that meant you could meet your neighbor at the same hour tomorrow. For now, there were old stones keeping their places and new porches figuring out theirs. For now, there were lines being drawn that no one had to cross if they did not wish to. And then, as if cued by a conductor the forest respected, money and manners arrived together wearing the same suit. If you were to slow the story to the speed of carpenters, you would see it clearly. Wagons rolling in with beams that had already been sanded smoother than the cheeks of the babies watching from porches. Crates of mirrors wrapped in wool. Boxes of heavy spoons that would soon shine at long tables. Fabrics in the new colors of ambition. The Northwest did not come to live in the valley. They came to display a life and let the valley notice. They were not the first to build. Not the first to throw a dance, not the first to bring a bell, but they were the first to put a frame around everything and call it official. They declared a square where people already stood to talk. They declared a boulevard where carts already sought the flattest ground. They drafted a crest and had it carved above doorways so that the town would know where gratitude should be mailed. The town was not ungrateful. The town was polite. It wore the crest like a hat. That was a little too tight, but handsome in photographs. Money has a sound when it moves through wood. It lowers the squeak in the stairs. It sharpens the corners of cabinets. It makes banisters smooth under palms and balcony rails comfortable under elbows during a speech. The Northwest house went up faster than anyone thought it would because time itself likes to see what it looks like when polished. Windows multiplied until the house could watch the entire valley watch it. Parties assembled as if they had been rehearsed for months. And perhaps they had. Somewhere in a city where the fog tasted different. At the first gala, the lamps were so bright, people laughed when they walked in, not in mockery, but in the way you laugh when stepping from dusk into a sudden noon. Dresses moved like water. Shoes clicked in clever rhythms that made the floorboards feel like instruments. Trays drifted by with pastries that pretended to be clouds and confections so delicate a sigh could have altered their architecture. At the center of the room, stories about the valley were told in the polished voice of someone who had decided what should be remembered. There is a difference between founding and branding. The Northwests were excellent at the second. They collected the valley's oldest tales and arranged them into a mirror that flattered their reflection. The logging days, the stubborn winters, the music that softened both, the quiet agreements between neighbors, the strange lights in the forest, all of it retold with a ribbon tied over the top that matched the crest above the door. People nodded. The pastries were very good, and the retelling did not ruin the truths so much as rearrange them. Most truths can survive a ribbon. They wait until the ribbon frays and then simply step out again, unchanged. Still, something shifted. Official names stamped themselves on corners where nicknames had been enough. A clock appeared on the bell tower to back up the bell, because precision in love is company. A ledger was begun that did not simply count nails and candles and sacks of flour, but tallied the value of appearance event by event. The town developed a public face, and with it, inevitably, a private one. The private face kept old jokes and old paths and the habit of leaving saucers of milk. The public face learned how to host, how to pose, how to invite journalists to stand in the square and use words like splendid and modern. The forest squinted, amused. It had hosted many faces. It gave equal shade to polished hats and frayed ones. Birds built nests on the edges of invitations and dropped feathers on coats without reading the names sewn into the collars. Rivers do not RSVP. If you pulled the camera back from the ballroom, you would see that same careful house built directly on a ground that hummed with older arrangements. The foundation was true. The beams were honest. The craftsmanship was very fine. But the land beneath had known other dances, softer ones, danced by boots that did not click so loudly, danced by paws and hooves and roots. When a house sits atop older music, sometimes the rhythms cross in interesting ways. Floorboards whisper when no one is walking. Lamps flicker in time with the wind that has not yet arrived. Portraits seem to turn their eyes not toward the viewer, but toward a spot on the wall where a knot in the wood forms a neat little triangle. That last detail would not bother anyone at all. It is the nature of wood to make shapes while it waits. As the parties multiplied, expectations did too. Invitations became declarations. The calendar filled. A town that had been practicing being a town found itself scheduled. Almshouse donations and masquerade themes were discussed with equal seriousness. Advice flowed from the largest porch like music. People stood under the eaves and nodded and went home and continued to do things the way their grandmothers had taught them. Politeness and practicality braided themselves as they always do, and yet, for all the polish, the valley still had that small tilt to it, that sense that something was watching and smiling and making notes in a language that did not need paper. In quiet rooms, the clever minds stayed up too late, their tea going cold, their diagrams making tidy piles. The maps these minds drew did not show the town's new names. They showed pressure and possibility. They showed where the air felt different. They showed where an idea might land if given a special runway. If you had walked past those rooms and peeked in, you would have seen the future in pencil, hovering politely, waiting to be inked. The Northwest made the town proud, and pride is not a crime. Pride can be a warm quilt against a long winter. But pride can also love mirrors more than windows, and the valley is not a mirror. It is a window into itself, and it prefers to be looked through rather than looked at. The years would teach this distinction gently at first, then with a firmer hand. For now, the parties were still bright, and the speeches were still smooth. The pastries were still astonishing, and the bell tower clock kept perfect time, or close enough for dancing. On a late night, after guests had gone and the house had exhaled, a draft slipped through a seam and tickled the corner of a ledger. The ledger lifted a page as if to peek ahead at its own story. A triangle sketched idly in the margin by a bored clerk glinted faintly in lamplight, and then, in the blink between two eyelids, looked a little more like an eye and a little less like a doodle. It was only a trick of light. It is always a trick of light. And yet the air felt amused, as if someone somewhere had leaned closer. The town had a public face now, and a schedule and a crest. It had the first outlines of a legend, even if the legend had been combed and powdered. It had newcomers and old families, planers and fiddlers, a bell that forgave late arrivals, and a square that remembered who stood where at last year's fair. It had, more than anything, momentum. Momentum carries people toward each other. It would carry two brothers back together and apart, and together again. It would carry a scientist toward a suggestion. It would carry a shy journal toward the hands that would open it in a summer we will visit soon. It would carry a whisper all the way to a door that ought never have been built, and yet, because ideas love doors, was built with great care. But that is later. For now, let the lanterns dim. Let the guests find their coats. Let the street grow quiet except for the last soft sweep of a broom and the sigh of a door easing shut. Let the bell tell the hour in a voice that respects sleep. The town is invented. Tomorrow it will invent itself again the way towns do, adding and forgetting, polishing and scuffing, learning by repetition which parts of the story are heavy and which parts can be set down for a while. And at the edge of the valley, where the trees stand with their hands in their pockets, the wind changes a little. It smells like chalk. It smells like a tide going out and a bigger tide coming in. When you are ready, we will follow that tide to the shore where two brothers look at the same horizon and see two different boats. We will follow it to the workshop where a problem meets a promise and calls it inspiration. We will follow it to a basement where a light machine learns a dangerous trick, and to a summer where a journal left under a board becomes a map for a pair of hearts that always choose each other. Not yet. Breathe first. Let the valley settle in your chest. Listen to the bell tower name the hour slowly, kindly. Let the sound go quiet in the pines. Then we will go on. Morning comes with the kind of mist that keeps secrets from yawning too loud. And the town practices one of its favorite arts, turning stories into shelves, not to hide them, to keep them from rolling away. There were always tales of the time a man shook hands with his own shadow and it returned with a splinter, of a fish that learned two alphabets and swam upriver to correct the spelling on a sign, of a mayor who sneezed at a map, told at cook fires, shared at porch rails, traded for nails and cinnamon. But a curious thing happens when a place decides it wants mirrors on the walls and a guest book near the door. The tales put on clean shirts and start calling themselves history. So the town sets up a committee with a ribbon and a pen with an important feeling weight. Someone writes a foreword about rugged beginnings. Someone draws a crest with angles that please the eye. A man with a broad grin and absurd credentials finds his way into the footnotes more often than footnotes expect. He signs things with flourishes and laughs in the wrong places at the right volume. If you stack enough paper under a tall tale, it stops wobbling. You can stand on it to reach the top shelf. You can point to it and say, "Look, this is how it always was." And the paper, flattered, will not disagree. Museums appear like polite umbrellas, useful, presentable, and slightly funny when opened indoors. A hall of curiosities arrives to show visitors the town's sense of humor, and the town's tolerance for mystery at the same time. Here, a jackalope with excellent posture. There, a jar labeled something that seems like a dare. Between them, placards written by someone trying very hard to be serious while describing something that refuses to be. It is not a crime to laugh. Laughter is insulation when the air turns strange. A good joke keeps a chilly truth from nipping at your wrist. The town learns the trick well. If you describe the oddness with a wink, the oddness winks back and behaves in company. Children press noses to glass. Elders tell the better versions that didn't make it onto the plaques. Everyone goes home slightly braver. But the forest does not read plaques. It listens for footsteps and recognizes most of them. It knows the archivist who tucks a curl behind one ear when a date won't fit in the line. It knows the janitor who whistles off-key and never leaves his broom standing bristles down. It knows the child who believes every word and the child who pretends not to. The forest observes the new layer of names the town has laid over the old ones and says what forests always say in such times. Very good. Keep your lists. We'll keep ours. Sometimes the lists meet. A ledger records a delivery that never happened, and yet the shelves hold the goods. A guest book shows a signature that belongs to a man long gone, and yet no one remembers forging it, and the ink is as dry as any other. A portrait's eye seems to follow not the viewer, but a point where the wall's knot makes a tidy, accidental triangle. A tour guide loses her place and finds a better one, guided by a sentence that wasn't on her card this morning. The town, through its historians and its showmen and its comedians, discovers how to dance with truth. One step of fact, one step of folklore, a turn, a bow, and a promise to meet again next Tuesday. And under that promise, something takes notes. A voice that likes the way pride polishes memory sits in the corner of a mind and hums along. It likes committees. It likes plans. It likes the way a plaque can make a point look important just by sitting next to it. It especially likes ambition, not because ambition is unkind, but because ambition is focused, and focus, in the right weather, can be steered. So the town becomes official in the way a bedtime becomes official when the pages number themselves. The bell rings the hours that the clock approves. The square holds speeches that the paper quotes. The museum sells postcards that send jokes out into the world like seeds. And still the river runs as it always did. And still the pines move their shoulders at night. And still the edges are thin in places where the ground remembers to be willing. History is a quilt, and tonight the stitches are neat. We will turn it back gently and look at the seam where two brothers learn to pull in different directions with the same love. Breathe once, slowly in and out. The shoreline waits. There is a coast made of glittering mistakes. Bottle glass worn kind by waves until it shines like candy you must not eat. Here, two boys grow up together with pockets full of found colors and a single shared map folded a dozen times. They are alike in the way driftwood pieces are alike, shaped by the same weather, pointed in different directions. One sees machines where others see puzzles. The other sees people where others see walls. 6 fingers busy with diagrams, 2 fists quick to defend. They build boats of scrap and kingdoms of afternoons. They make a secret language out of glances, a vow out of a handshake so serious it is funny, and so funny it is sacred. Every summer, wind teaches them patience. Every winter, salt teaches them thrift. They plan a future with an old engine and a brave name painted across the side, a name that makes them both taller when they say it out loud. Someday they will launch. Someday they will find treasure, which in their dictionary means jobs that don't grind down hope, a house that doesn't echo with disappointment, proof that a person can be more than the size of their town's opinion. The world, generous and clumsy as always, offers an opportunity that fits only one set of hands, a fair where cleverness gets weighed, a display that hums when the room is quiet, a judge whose eyebrows rise in the shape of a door opening. The design is careful. The science is real. The future, for a moment, stands still and lets itself be measured. But futures and brothers are both creatures of timing, a step too close. A protective move interpreted as a swipe. An accident that breaks more than glass. The humming stops. A paper that had said yes now says no, and the word echoes longer than it should. It is not malice. It is not fate. It is the sort of misstep that happens when love sprints and caution trips. And yet the bruise it leaves is the kind that flowers through years. Voices raise. Promises made on the beach feel for a sharp minute, like chains. The house becomes too small for both of them. Pride soars a thumb, holds the door open because pride would rather hold anything than apologize. One brother leaves in a tangle of words he does not entirely mean, wearing a coat that is not warm enough, carrying the wrong kind of map. The other stays, taking a scholarship like a lifeline and a sentence at once, packing the cleverness that once belonged to both of them into boxes with careful labels, and a note tucked under the top flap. I'll make this right. The sea, uninterested in human subplots, keeps rolling glass until it gives up on being sharp. If you walk the beach in those months, you might find a shard shaped in a way that looks like a sign. You might hold it to the light and almost see the shape of a triangle. You might skip it across the surface and watch it hop, counting 1, 2, 3, and sink. You might think briefly that counting is a kind of spell. You might be right. In separate rooms, each brother learns to speak a language the other does not practice daily anymore. One learns equations with long, precise names. One learns the price of a smile and how to negotiate for a little more of it. One learns that the mind is a muscle that grows where it is used. One learns that luck is a muscle too, and that you can sometimes tense it at exactly the right moment and make doors look at you kindly. Neither stops loving the other. Love is not a switch. It is a lantern, and even when you blow it out, your hands smell like the match. In dreams, the brother with the diagrams begins to hear a voice he does not name. It praises his clarity. It admires his hands. It suggests softly that the rules of nature like to be rearranged by people who understand them. It wonders, politely, whether he has considered looking not out as the telescopes do, but between, as only unusual eyes can. The dreams feel like caffeine that doesn't make your heart race. The mornings feel like answers waiting to be written down. He does not speak of this to anyone, not because it is shameful, but because it is tender and private, like finding a small, perfect shell in a tide pool and wanting to hold it a while before you show a friend. We are not yet at the moment where the shell becomes a key. We are at the quiet part, where the room is small and the desk is messy, and the wall above the desk slowly gathers notes in a pattern that could be explained to anyone and will not be, not yet. Where a journal with a number on the cover begins to earn that number in faithful lines. Where the word portal floats through a tired head and lands not with a thud, but with a click. Far away, the other brother learns the mathematics of hustle, which is to say, he learns to speak hope in a currency other people accept. He tries ideas on like jackets and watches, which ones make strangers' eyes brighten. He makes mistakes that feel like familiar furniture from childhood, the ones with dents they've always had. He carries the shore in his voice without noticing. On bad nights, he takes the map back out and smooths it. On better mornings, he draws a new line on it, one that points west, whether or not he admits that's where it's pointing. Between them, the town continues to practice being official. Parties, plaques, the bell keeping time that feels almost like fate if you're tired enough. The edges stay thin in the places where they have always been thin. The forest watches. The river tells itself what it has learned. The future shifts its weight from one foot to the other and waits for someone to invite it in. When you are ready, we will open a door that is not a door and meet the voice that smiles like an angle. Here is a room that loves midnight. The lamp is assembled light, the kind that seems to remember the sun. Papers make a slow rustle that sounds like winter leaves. Chalk dust turns sleeves into constellations. The window holds a rectangle of dark, full of patient stars. You can hear a campus breathing. One cough down the hall, one bicycle bell, one set of footsteps hurrying toward an answer. On the desk, diagrams that embarrass the word ambitious. Arrows that point nowhere ordinary. Questions with teeth. The kind of work that makes the mind forget the body until the body gently clears its throat and asks for water. It is the place where a young scientist becomes the kind of scientist who forgets to celebrate, not out of coldness, out of fervor too warm to waste on small fires. Tonight, as on many nights, he puts his head down for a minute that becomes 10. Sleep, practical and generous, takes him at his word. The room relaxes. The papers adjust themselves into a neater slope. The window, grateful for the lack of attention, lets a particular star look in with one extra degree of boldness. The dream is the good kind, the kind that feels like a spill of sunlight in winter. A room without corners, a warmth without source. A certainty that laughter could be made of geometry if only someone wrote the proof. In that certainty, a voice. It is friendly the way a knife can be friendly when carving bread, efficient, admiring, perfectly at home in a hungry kitchen. It compliments the mind, not the face. It praises patience with a tone that says impatience would be forgiven. It asks questions that are not questions, but opening lines of a duet. Have you considered, what if, between... The words fall not on the mind, but into it, like seeds in a garden that has been made ready with work no one saw. The first bargain is not a bargain. It is a conversation between a need and a tool. The mind needs a door. The voice knows a hinge. The mind has a riddle. The voice hums a key that fits it. The mind glows. The voice glows in the glow. Someone somewhere makes a note in a book that does not exist. Contact achieved. Morning brings the kind of clarity that tastes like mint. The chalk seems lighter in the hand. The lines go down straighter. The math argues, then agrees. Solutions arrive in a tone that suggests they were always there, shy and waiting. The scientist writes faster and then steadier and then slower again, as if the good becomes better when spoken softly. The dreams return as generous as tutors and as addictive as praise. They do not smack of danger. They smell like possibility. They resemble, in the most disarming ways, mentorship. What is a muse, after all, but a voice that accompanies your best work and seems designed for your ear? The muse, in this case, prefers triangles. It likes the elegance of 3 points refusing to fall into a line. It likes the way a circle can be bullied into a pyramid with the right stories. It is not malicious yet. It is only delighted. The journals thicken. The first volume feels like a lung. A second waits politely and then begins to inhale truth of its own. Margins collect little symbols that look like jokes from the side and like instructions from the front. A sketch repeats itself across weeks, as if tracing the inside of a mind's eyelid. A single eye, a bow tie, a fingertip extended in reassurance or warning. One could call it doodling. One could call it foreshadowing. One could call it neither, and go on working. And work he does. Equations marry engines. Circuits learn to listen. Metal learns to talk back in the delicate language of hum. The desk becomes too small, the room too low, the campus too formal for a machine that wants to look not forward, but between. The project needs distance from polite eyes and room for silence loud enough to hold the unknown without spilling it. A letter goes out to an old address on the coast, the paper absorbing salt in the writer's fingertips. I think I can build something. Come see. Another letter goes out to someone with hands good at making ideas stand without wobbling. I need a partner. Bring the kind of patience that can lift heavy things. The valley, which has always heard letters that matter, hears these and prepares. It tightens the seams in the ground just enough to hold a foundation. It loosens the seams in the air just enough to hold a theory. The bell tower, informed by no one, and by everything, practices the hour that will matter. The forest mentions, in its creaking way, that certain roots have always liked a particular clearing. And the voice in the dreams, now comfortable enough to imagine it lives in the house, smiles like an angle and does not mention its hunger. Not because it is wise, though it is that, but because it is certain. Certainty is the language of entities that have always gotten what they wanted by waiting until a mind believes the wanting was its own. We will build a machine in a minute. First, we will invite the man who can keep a bolt from stripping and a friend from falling. First, we will practice saying careful in a tone that does not sound like fear. Breathe. The workshop door is about to open. Some people carry steadiness the way others carry tune. Fiddleford Hadron McGucket arrives with a toolbox that clinks like rain on a metal roof and a smile that finds the fastest path to the corners of a room. His fingers are the sort that can tell, by touch, which screw chose the wrong jar. He has the good habit of asking a question before moving a thing that looks purposeful. He listens to a blueprint until it tells him where it's embarrassed. Kindness lives in his voice, even when his voice is arguing with a stubborn bracket. The workshop in the valley wakes as if it has been dozing just to make the reveal more dramatic. Lights click into being with the surprise of deer lifting their heads. Tables clear their throats and offer their level backs. The journals take up residence on nails hammered for them alone. On a chalkboard far too large for modesty, a tunnel of symbols points toward a point that declines to be on the board at all. Between, says the scholar, tapping the spot that cannot be tapped. All right then, says the engineer, rolling up sleeves as if rolling up a map. They work in the way good pairs work, with affection that does not make the tools blush. One thinks in leaps and needs a steady place to land. One thinks in ladders and needs to know which wall the other intends to lean against. They share sandwiches over plans so greasy the mustard draws constellations. They make lists, lose them, and find better lists inside the ones they lost. They shout sometimes, only because sound carries ideas faster across a room full of hums. At night, one dreams of a room without corners. The other dreams of a field with perfect rows. In the morning, both carry coffee like a sacrament. The machine grows the way a tree grows in a time lapse. Except this tree has bolts and coils and a patience that could teach winter how to wait. It is not a portal yet. It is a promise of looking. It is a howl politely contained in geometry. It is the kind of apparatus that makes the air around it stand straighter. Tests begin small, the way tests should when you are knocking on a door without a peephole. A light shines and does not flicker. A coin tossed into the field comes back with an attitude. A pencil line drawn at the edge of the humming goes a shade lighter, as if the world borrowed a little of its graphite to pay a bill in a different room. The journals keep up, their sentences tidy even when the writer's hands are shaking from caffeine or awe. And then a test that is not small. Sometimes caution is a ladder with a missing rung where confidence expects wood. They turn a dial a hair too far, or exactly far enough. History is poor at measuring hairs. The machine answers with a voice it did not have yesterday. The air in front of it does not so much split as remember how to be elsewhere. For breath, the workshop thinks it is a different building with different gravity. For breath, the room without corners is not a dream, but a guest. Fiddleford looks up and sees something no kindness knows how to hold. Not a monster, with teeth you can name and run from. Not a storm, you can shut a door against that. He sees too much, the way a child sees the ocean for the first time and knows, suddenly and forever, how small a hand is. But this ocean is also a cliff, and this cliff laughs, and this laugh has angles that will not leave his ears. He staggers back into a world that has not moved and finds that his own edges have. His hands, which never shook, begin to practice a tremor as if learning an instrument badly. The mug he picks up is suddenly a riddle. The door, which always opened to a push, needs to be told its name before it behaves. He is not broken. He is rearranged, which is worse for a man who has spent a life making things stand straight. The scholar sees it and does not blink it away. He hears apologies trying to form in his mouth and lets them come out as plans instead, because that is his language when he is guilty. He builds a device as a lullaby, light and sound folded into forgetfulness, a mercy aimed at his friend's pain. Memory becomes a material to shape, and it shapes beautifully, because it is made of the same stuff as stories have always obeyed careful hands. The first use is gentle, a moment smooth, a corner dulled, a nightmare unthreaded. Fiddleford breathes easier. He smiles a smile that fits again. The workshop exhales. The journals record the settings, the dosage, the calibration, the way skilled kindness records recipes, precise, grateful, repeatable. A good deed, done quietly, filed under necessary. Outside the workshop, the town keeps its schedule, waltzes its waltzes, pins ribbons to achievements that feel like anchors in deep water. Inside, a device designed to mend begins almost at once to suggest other uses to minds less careful than the man who built it. A club of concerned citizens stirs at the edge of possibility, and possibility, when it smells fear, sometimes offers solutions with very straight lines. We are not at the gathering in the basement yet. We are at the first echo in the quiet room. Kindness applied to a wound, and kindness, sadly, learning how easily it can be borrowed by people with different definitions of help. Fiddleford will try to stay whole. He will sing to himself while he works. He will hum in the grocery line. He will keep his hat on even indoors, as if the right brim angle can keep certain sights from falling back into his eyes. Some days it works. On worse days, he stares at a wall and sees a triangle drawn with a ruler that laughs. On better days, he comes into the workshop and fixes 3 impossible problems in a row, and then sits very still because the room tilts, and he will not ask it to stop in front of anyone. The scholar writes more neatly when he is worried. The pages get straighter, the letters smaller, the margins exact. He has the look of a man arguing tenderly with a future that refuses to be reasonable. The machine hums behind him, faithful. The bell in town rings the hour that insists on being rung next. The forest leans in, as forests do when the weather changes on the far side of the world, but remembers to send a breeze ahead as a note. And somewhere, in a room that is not a room, the muse that called itself a friend taps the glass of the moment with a fingernail of light and waits for the crack to notice it can be a door. Let's breathe here. In, out. The workshop lights settle. The journals close their eyes as books do when they trust they'll be opened again. When we open them, a countdown will have started, even if no one says the number out loud. The countdown did not begin with numbers on a board. It began with a hush the room learned from the forest. Coils cooled. Notes aligned themselves in a last tidy stack. The lamp, which had watched so many midnights, gave off the kind of light that keeps secrets warm. In that light, 2 lives met at a doorway no house should have. A final calibration. A final kindness. Coffee pushed across the bench, sleeve tugged down so chalk wouldn't stain a wrist. A final look toward the window where the valley waited, patient as ever. And then the switch, a modest thing shaped like any other switch, asked to carry a prayer it did not understand. The machine woke as if it had been dreaming about this moment. Air learned a new behavior. Lines on paper decided they preferred to be corridors. The space in front of the apparatus remembered something it had never known and became a place you could fall into without moving at all. A sound happened that was not loud, only true, and therefore large. Ford, the scholar with the steady pen, stood where his math had told him to stand, near enough to witness, far enough to respect. The hum deepened. The doorway widened. A breath of elsewhere brushed his face and was very cold and very warm in quick alternation, as if indecisive weather were trying on moods. Fiddleford held the dial as if holding a friend's sleeve at a cliff edge. His careful hands remembered what they had seen on a worse day and did not want the room to see it again. "Easy," said his voice to the hum, as people speak to horses. The hum answered in the tone of oceans. The door behaved. For a long blink, it was nothing more frightening than a new horizon. Then horizons, which prefer to stay far away, rushed forward with the clumsy eagerness of a dog not called, and everything tilted. It was a small tilt. All disasters that matter begin small. A bolt tightened properly, loosened by an integer the math had not asked for. A foot placed precisely, slid a fraction on dust that had not been swept because it was too fine to notice. A thought held perfectly in one mind was interrupted by the arrival of a different thought in another. These are how histories turn, not by tragedy's love of trumpets, but by the exactness of almost. Stan, the brother who loved with his shoulders and his jaw, was in the room because love refuses to stay on the safe side of a door. He had come to see, to help, to guard, to argue, to carry. He had come to return something broken, to a brother, to a bond, to a promise made on sand and salt, and found in its place a thing with power he could not lift and rules he could not haggle. They argued, as brothers do, because arguing is how their care breathes. Step back. Don't touch that. Listen. No, you listen. It was not malice. It was volume. In the noise, the machine heard a permission it wanted. The doorway widened again, not like a mouth opening to bite, more like a curtain that never learned to hang perfectly still. Ford reached. Stan reached. The room stumbled very slightly, and that was enough. A sleeve, a wrist, a pull. A coat caught by a wind that had no source. A body that knew how to hold itself in gravity, asked to learn a new grammar, and before it could answer, was enrolled. Ford fell without falling, the way a thought leaves a face. One instant he was present, drawing the room's shape in his calm attention. The next, he was a memory, trying to keep all its edges. Stan shouted a name that was still in the room, but already far away. Fiddleford grabbed for a dial that spun like a wheel on ice. The hum became a specific note the bell tower would never make. The chalkboard's equations leaned forward to see better and couldn't. Then the machine, pleased with itself, became simple again. The door became air. The room returned to its ordinary size and stood there pretending to be innocent. Dust settled in a slow vote. Silence counted to 10. No one spoke first because no word volunteered to be first. Tears didn't come. Shock is thirsty. Stan's hands, which could carry too much without complaint, opened and closed on nothing. Fiddleford's kind fingers found the bench and learned to hold wood like a raft. The chalk on the board looked like flowers at a grave someone had arranged very carefully. Stan moved. Motion is the language of people who do not accept endings. He searched the room as if it might misplace a brother in a drawer. He touched the machine with the caution of a man petting a sleeping dog that is bitten once. He said, "We bring him back," not as an instruction, but as a law. He looked to Fiddleford. Fiddleford nodded because good men do not let better men carry impossible weight alone. They tried. Of course they tried. Settings were reversed and re-reversed. Power was coaxed and scolded. The machine blinked with the politeness of a clerk closing a window. "Sorry, we're shut. Please come back another century." Each attempt found only between, not where. Days folded into a sort of season that has no month. Stan slept in corners and woke with resolve as stiff as the beam he'd used for a pillow. Fiddleford invented new tendernesses for metal until the metal could not accept any more attention. The journals, which had always known how to be brave in ink, became relentless in their neatness, as if legibility could conjure a twin. And in the valley, a rip in the fabric of what has took its first proper breath. Not a grand wound in the sky, not a theatrical lightning scar, only a rift the size of an idea, fragile enough to fit in a bottle if you knew its name, strong enough to remember breaking forever. The workshop felt it. The forest noticed it the way an old dog lifts its head at a faraway thunder. The bell tower, a Democrat, rang on schedule, unaware it would one day ring to a crowd sheltering below it from a weather made of shapes. Fiddleford reached the limit of what a good heart can host alone. The earlier sight returned to him in the night, with perfect edges and no mercy. He cradled his head in both hands as if it were a too-full bowl, and found he could not stop it from spilling. He built forgetfulness the way a friend builds a blanket fort for another friend who is shaking. He used it once, then again, then to help a town that did not know it needed help because kindness scales when asked wearily. When he finally stepped away, hat low, eyes bright, with the peculiar shine of a wound that will not be admitted, Stan did not curse him. Stan nodded. The nod of a man who understands that boats sometimes leave even when the weather begs them to stay. "I'll handle it," he said to no one, to everyone, to the machine that still had his brother's last breeze in it. He would have to handle everything now. A portal he did not design but could learn, a lie he did not want but would wear, a town with a schedule and a ledger and a love of ribbon that would not forgive easily, and a basement where the future was politely waiting to be turned back on. The summer swallowed Ford like a coin, and the year went on as if it had change to make. Breathe. Slowly. In, out. The light is dimmer, but it is still light. We will walk upstairs and watch a sign go up that tells jokes while hiding a promise. A house knows when its purpose changes. The beams lean in. The stairs learn the new rhythm of feet. The door frame practices being patient, with a different kind of pause before the handle turned. The place that had been a laboratory first and a home second became, by necessity and a fierce sort of love, a stage, a shop, and a secret. Stan. Now the man with two names and one objective took inventory the way sailors scan horizon and hold breath at every glint. A pile of artifacts and oddities gathered during years of study, weighted in crates with labels like no and maybe later and never in daylight. A basement held a sleeping giant of coils and quiet. A town, curious and kind and nosy in the way good towns are, wanted a story it could attend at 11 a.m. and again at 2 p.m. with a discount for families. So he gave it one. He built the Mystery Shack the way magicians build patter, with wit, nerve, and a respect for the audience's wish to be fooled just enough to feel safe. A jackalope was mounted at an angle that made it part joke, part accusation. A Sasquatch was carved with a grin. A tour route was invented that took eyes perfectly away from the basement door while giving them plenty to look at. A gift shop learned how to sing its register in friendly jingles. A hand-painted sign announced, "Wonders with the confidence of a trumpet." The town came relieved. Laughter is a fence you can lean on while the wilderness catches its breath. Children pressed noses to glass. Teenagers pretended not to enjoy it, and then remembered their favorite parts later when the porch lights were on and the mosquitoes were liars. Elders shook their heads and bought a magnet. The bell tower approved of any business that respected hours. The paper ran a photograph with a caption that made the new owner sound like a man who had always been here. Stanford Pines. The name fit like a borrowed coat that would be tailored over time. He wore it because he had to, because banks and inspectors and cousins, twice removed, are friendlier to men with consistency. and because nobody in town had met two 6-foot shadows at once. He wore it for another reason, too. It made the promise to his brother public without saying so. The name was a vow with syllables. At night, the showman put away his grin like a suit and went to work in a light nobody else needed. He learned a language that was not his first, the grammar of coils, the dialect of a portal that had heard only the voice that built it. He spoke to the machine the way people speak to stubborn clocks, with threats, then with bargaining, then with a quiet resignation that still gets the hands moving. He kept a calendar with one circle on it, a date without a season that moved each time math laughed. He did not do it alone, not entirely. Suze arrived as if the door had ordered him, soft-hearted, steady, gifted at fixing misbehaving corners and misbehaving mornings. Wendy came with the posture of someone who already knows how to carry a ladder and a conversation at the same time. The shack became work and home and a joke that fed you, and the valley accepted it because the valley likes places where people gather and toss their ordinary days into a communal basket to see if they can be braided into something more. Years rounded off their sharper edges. A path from the bus stop to the shack learned to recognize suitcase wheels in June. The gift shop learned the rhythm of tourists who swore they didn't believe in anything and left believing in good storytelling at least. The basement collected dust and then rejected it in little fits when the machine decided to mutter awake and then back to sleep. The journals, hidden and divided, pressed their spines against boards and waited for hands that would read them with the necessary combination of caution and wonder. Guilt. That patient houseguest stayed, but it did not consume. It was given chores. Tighten this bolt, bluff that official, count the till, fix the sign, mend the hinge, circle the date again. When guilt has tasks, it is less likely to turn into despair. Stan made sure it had plenty. He also made sure the town had enough of him to recognize and enough of him to misread. He was gruff because gruffness is a sturdy mask. It lets kindness peek from behind it without getting shy. He was funny because jokes are umbrellas that make storms easier to walk through. He was secretive in the focused way of a man keeping a promise, not the slippery way of a man avoiding a bill. People forgave him everything he didn't say because his silence felt like a bridge, not a wall. Every night, the basement lights switched on like a lighthouse in reverse. One lamp, one bench, one page, one man doing math with a pencil he chewed to splinters. Every dawn, that same man stood at a counter and sold a rubber chicken for $3.99 with tax and a flourish that made the child who bought it feel as if magic were a budget line item. Survival and devotion held hands, and did the waltz, the bell tower counted for them. He had help in another way, though he didn't call it that. The town's noise, its fairs and its fender benders, its meetings about potholes, and its debates about bake sale themes covered the hum from below. Noise is a blanket you can tuck around secrets. The shack's own clatter, tour patter, floorboard squeak, joke plaque was another layer. Under quilts of normalcy, impossible can sleep through the day safely. And so the years sorted themselves as years do when given simple work and one difficult hope. The calendar with one circle stayed pinned above the bench. On some nights he drew it darker. On others he looked at it and let his hand fall to his side. On rare mornings when the machine's polite mutter sounded briefly like a word, he believed with the full weight of his shoulders, "I will bring you home." The valley watched and approved. It loves stubborn vows. It loves shops with bells on the door and basements where people whisper please to complicated objects. It loves children who drag parents to see a thing twice, and the parent who pretends to object, and then takes the long way home so the conversation doesn't end. It loves most of all the way a place can become a promise. One day a bus would arrive carrying two voices that could turn a house into a story, and a story into a season. One day, a book would be found under a board and open itself like a patient mouth. One day, the calendar's blank circle would meet a different circle, one drawn on a sweater with glitter, and the two would make a kind of target that arrows called moments cannot resist. But first, the bus must crest the hill and sigh at the stop. The bell tower must announce an hour that tastes like bubble gum and pine sap. The shack's sign must clatter slightly, as if clearing its throat to say, "Welcome," in a language even skeptics understand. Breathe. Let the road come into view. Hear the wheels on gravel. Hear the old door open with a complaint it secretly enjoys. The summer is arriving. The bus doors open with the authority of a librarian closing a book gently. End of one chapter, beginning of the next. Dipper stepped down first, cautious eyes counting details like stars. Mabel followed, sweater loud in the kind way fireworks are, with a grin that invited the town to be its best self immediately. June in the valley wore cedar and raspberry jam. Dust motes practiced slow ballet in sunbeams the pines had trimmed for them. The Mystery Shack sign creaked exactly once, a single-note greeting it kept for special occasions. Somewhere a radio misbehaved and then apologized by playing a chorus everyone liked. Grunkle Stan did not so much welcome them as deploy them. Beds here, chores there, rules everywhere. And then promptly undermined his own sternness by overpaying them in stickers and stories that began with "Listen, kid," and ended in the clatter of a cash drawer and an unexpected hug. Suze mentioned sandwiches and meant it. Wendy, from her high stool, lifted the corner of a smile in a way that told the twins she saw everything and blamed no one. The shack learned their footsteps. Mabel's skips made the floorboards answer in a kind of tune. Dipper's careful tread taught the third stair to stay silent out of respect for investigations. The kitchen understood that midnight snacks could be sacred and 3 a.m. water could be a whole ritual. The gift shop learned which shelves would be leaned on while puzzles were discussed. On a walk that did not know it would be important, the woods invited Dipper to look where the light fell into triangles. Dust, leaves, the corner of something that was not a branch. He shifted a board the way you move a sleeping cat, slow, sorry, determined, and found a book that seemed simultaneously relieved and amused to be found at last. Journal 3, though the number would advise him later. Its cover was a hand holding up a secret. Its pages were a patient museum of warnings and wonder, written by a mind that once believed ink could outpace disaster. Illustrations watched him with the friendliness of maps. Margins held notes the way the forest holds paths, some official, some created by curiosity's feet. The ink did not flash. It did not whisper. It simply felt awake in his hands the way good tools do when they recognize work waiting. Dipper's breath changed, slower, then faster, then steady, the rhythm of someone whose fear and joy have discovered they are cousins. He turned to the first entry as if removing a bandage. The words looked back and agreed to be read. Back at the shack, Mabel found the summer's texture effortlessly. She collected new names for old things. She invented holidays for no reason, except that sometimes a heart wants a day that doesn't exist yet. She met the town with the generosity of someone who thinks strangers are just jokes you haven't told yet. She wore sweaters like flags reminding the valley how many colors kindness can be. The two of them formed a small planet with its own weather. Meteor showers of in-jokes, tidally locked arguments that always faced the same side of love, eclipses of worry that passed quickly, seasons of patience and impatience that canceled each other out with laughter. They disagreed with heat and forgave with embarrassing speed. They chose each other, not only when easy, but when necessary, which is the definition that matters. Journal 3 did not turn their days into warnings. It turned them into quests, framed softly. It suggested that listening was as useful as running. It whispered that every town has doors you only find when you don't intend to use them. It taught them caution without cruelty, something many adults forget to teach and many children teach themselves when given the chance. The book also noticed the boy carrying it and the girl reading over his shoulder. The small symbols in its margins, the triangles and eyes that once seemed like decorations, measured their attention with a tailor's care. In the dreaming edges, a being that loved cleverness felt a very old project stir. Not yet, it thought, not yet. But soon, because the right minds had entered the room and switched the lights on with curiosity instead of fear. Stan watched all this and pretended not to. He arranged chores like chess pieces that would keep the kids tired enough to sleep and free enough to discover what would make them stubborn in the right ways. He growled his affection and then made pancakes in exactly the shape someone joked about a day earlier. He hit the basement with more misdirection than most governments afford themselves. He failed repeatedly and gloriously to hide how much he liked the sound of their feet. The valley approved. The bell tower found new meanings for familiar hours. The river rehearsed murmurs that would be needed later. A rift in a bottle far below the house held its breath, the way a violin string holds a note between finger and bow. The summer had arrived. It began to hand out mysteries the way birthdays hand out wishes, quietly, then less quietly, then with a laugh. The nice thing about a summer built like a string of beads is that each day can shine alone without making the others dim. The weeks of small weirds began that way. One curious bead at a time clicked onto the line the twins were wearing around their hearts. First, the forest politeness revealed as a pile of gnomes trying to be a boyfriend. Harmless if you see them before they stack. Mabel learned that being chosen isn't the same as being seen. Dipper learned that not every problem wants a map. Some want a laugh. The day ended with leaves and hair and a new respect for the word no said kindly and loud enough. Next, the lake and the rumor of a monster. Gobblewonker turned out to be a machine with loneliness built into its bolts. McGucket, hat brim low, piloted the ache. The twins learned that invention can be a letter you never sent because you were afraid of the reply, and that people become myths when you stop asking their names. Later, a camera rolled. Even later, a heart forgave itself a little. In town, the shack's wax museum melted into a riddle. Heads did what heads do when they have gone too long without a listener. A wax stand tried on trouble. The twins trailed footprints in the soft, found the truth, and refitted it with humor. Mabel discovered that craft, knitting, gluing, building, can grab the hand of fear and walk it out into daylight. A boy named Gideon smiled with the bright intensity of a magnifying glass in sun. He courted Mabel with showmanship and attention that felt like a soft trap. Journal 2 flickered at the edge of the week like a fish just under the surface. Stan bristled. Dipper worried. Mabel learned the shape of a boundary and drew it in glitter where everyone could see. Night of a different kind. A convenience store that remembered a bad day so hard it turned the memory into a haunting. The lights hummed in the wrong key. Shelves muttered. The twins learned that apologies can untie knots. The living and the unliving both suffer. Respect for the past, spoken in a voice that doesn't tremble, is a key you can carry without feeling the weight. In the woods, a tribe of manliness shouted lessons at a boy who already had the only lesson worth learning. Courage is care doing its job under pressure. Muscles posed. A multi-bear sighed. Dipper realized that people who teach with volume fear silence, and that standing still with your own values in your pocket is sometimes the strongest lift a body can do. A party at the shack. Double Dipper, because paper can be cruel and magic can be imprecise. A copying spell that carved the boy into versions of himself that all insisted they were the original. Mabel watched, heart-ready, and reminded him and the room that identity is choice plus memory, not the tally of how many pieces agree to wear your face. The clones learned vapor. The true boy learned self-trust. A holiday that didn't fit on calendars, Summer Wing, with its jack-o'-melons and the trickster who turned out to be hunger wearing a mask. The twins and their friends fed a problem the only food it really needed, empathy and a plan, and the town kept a tradition that kept the town. Sometimes you salvage a feeling, not because it is logical, but because it is needed. On a day for country fairs and taped-off areas, a case labeled Irrational Treasure opened like a laughing mouth. Quentin Tremblay stepped out of a footnote and into a wagon, reminding everyone that history forgives the honest fool more than it forgives the liar with straight lines. The twins learned to trust the absurd when the absurd is kinder than the polished. Fight Fighters punched its way through a screen and into the parking lot. Pixels learned physics. A friend learned that past bravado looks smaller in sunlight. The twins learned that fantasy brought home always asks for rent, and that you can take the lesson without keeping the tenant. Little Dipper, a device that changed sizes and a day that changed perspectives. Tiny bravery looks like ridiculous courage and is. Huge problems can be gentler when held by someone who remembers being small. Mabel discovered that teasing sits uncomfortably close to cruelty and walked herself back across that line with the grace of an apology. The time traveler's pig brought joy with hooves and a name. Waddles entered the family with a snort that sounded like belonging. Blendon blinked in and out like a calendar getting the hiccups. The twins learned that choice and chance knot themselves into each other, and that some things a friend found exactly when you needed a friend deserve to be kept, even if a day would look prettier without them. There were more. A pool with depths that hid a mermando who taught letters underwater. A carpet that swapped minds and made empathy immediate and hilarious. A band obsession that ended with truth spoken to a microphone. A pit with no bottom that was really a collection of stories told on the way down. Each week the valley offered a puzzle, with its politeness showing nothing intended harm beyond teaching, nothing beyond what the twins and their circle could carry with breath and togetherness. Through it all, Journal 3 found the right pace, never shouting, never scaring for the pleasure of it, never pretending knowledge is a shield that works without kindness. It gave names, and names are useful. It drew pictures, and pictures make doors less frightening. It asked questions, and questions are softer than locks. And in margins where triangles repeat, a being that has always preferred leverage over labor watched two hearts that would one day say no in a way that would undo years of yes. In the shack, Grunkle Stan kept his calendar and their chores. He taught work that keeps you true to yourself, which is the best kind. He barked in the morning and fell asleep in the chair after dinner, with the snore of a man who outran several kinds of sorrow and let one sit nearby without turning it into a chair for guests. Suze learned new jokes. Wendy learned new angles on the roof where the stars are lazier. The bell tower counted these weeks fairly. 12 chimes for noon, 1 for small bravery, 2 for a sister's inventiveness, 3 for the moment a boy closes a book, and looks up, believing differently about himself and the world. The forest ran its hand through their hair when they passed, like a grandmother saying nothing and everything. The river nodded as if each day had been set afloat correctly. The rift below learned their names from the vibrations of their feet and the way their laughter traveled through floorboards. The machine listened and tried not to learn anything, because machines are happier when they do not understand families. The dreaming edges smiled with patience a little too sharp. Breathe. Let these weeks settle like postcards in a shoebox. You can read them again any time without waking the house. Ahead there are larger shapes. A door with a bow tie will knock. A bottle will be asked to stay whole and will not. A wheel will almost turn. But all of that is carried safely by these small weirds, each a proof that this town prefers care over clever when the two compete, and triumphs when they cooperate. We will turn the page when you are ready. Time usually keeps its paws tucked, like a well-behaved cat napping on the back of a couch. In Gravity Falls, there are days when that cat stretches, flexes all 5 claws, and decides to bat at the curtains for a while. It starts small, a clock that loses 3 minutes and then finds them again on the windowsill. A sundial that swears it is afternoon while the bell tower insists on morning. On a hot day, Dipper stares too long at a page about paradoxes and feels the air thin, as if the paper has become a window. On a sweeter day, Mabel names a cloud, and later that afternoon the same cloud drifts by with the exact same face, as if the sky enjoyed the attention and came back for seconds. The first real tug on the thread comes with a rattle of tools and a man in a too-tight jumpsuit slipping out of a crack in the moment like a bookmark no one meant to drop. Blendin Blandin, bureaucrat of the hours, custodian of what already happened, arrives to sweep up a mess the town has made simply by existing out loud. He scolds the air. He scolds his clipboard. He scolds 2 children who look very sorry and very unsorry at the same time. Then he vanishes again in a puff of calendar dust, leaving behind the odd conviction that cause and effect just exchanged phone numbers. Time keeps tugging, a carnival ring toss that already happened and yet is happening again. A summer morning with the taste of déjà vu, like mint you can't quite identify. The twins discover that wishing is a kind of lever, and that some levers change what happened while others change how it feels. They learn that "I wish I had" and "I'm glad I didn't" can live in the same sentence without fighting. Then comes the day that becomes a knot. The pig, the prize, the pause button on an afternoon. Waddles into the story like a fate with freckles. Mabel meets him, and the meeting fits instantly, the way a laugh sometimes slips into a quiet room, and the room realizes it was waiting. Dipper, armed with a device and a temptation, slides the hour backwards and forwards until the day gleams. He reaches for perfection, and discovers that perfection charges an extra fee at the door. There are versions of the day where he is right, and versions where he is kind, and versions where both seem possible, until the hinge squeaks and one slips. In the version that holds, Mabel keeps Waddles. Time, pleased with itself, files the moment under fixed, and stamps it with a gentle scuff that looks like fate. Dipper learns the oldest science lesson there is. Some constants are choices you protect. He puts the device down carefully, the way you put down a letter you've read too many times. He does not smash it. He does not swear never to touch it again. He simply lets enough be enough. That is the braver vow. The town returns to its slow heartbeat. But the twins now hear it. They notice how the bell tower sits on the hinge between 1 hour and the next. They notice how the forest holds the past like a polite secret. They notice that the future is not a cliff you fall off, it's a path you set your feet on. One deliberate footstep at a time, with room for dancing when the ground is flat. Evenings deepen. Waddles learns the shack's kitchen like a wading pool. Sue shows the twins the trick of looking sideways at shadows to see where they're going. Wendy laughs at a joke she hasn't heard yet and then hears it the next day. Dipper folds his mistakes into his pocket and finds, after a few walks, that they have become maps. At night, Dipper reads the journal's chapter on temporal anomalies, and the margins tap their fingers. A triangle doodle near the heading seems a touch too symmetrical. In the dreaming edges, something that never hurries takes another neat note. They can nudge. They can learn. Patience. Time curls back onto the couch, paws tucked again, purr steady. But it watches the twins with half-closed eyes now, the way cats do when they have decided you belong to them, whether or not you have admitted it yet. Breathe. Let the hour change. No rush. We are carried. Not all storms announce themselves with thunder. Some of them drift in under a tent of telepathy, smiling for the cameras, glittering with sequins, riding a voice pitched to make secrets lean toward the stage. Lil Gideon arrives like a card trick you almost applaud before you see your wallet missing. He is a show, hair sprayed into sincerity, suits stitched from compliments, fingers that spread like fans to make applause seem inevitable. He reads minds as if the minds had asked to be tidied. He reads the room as if the room were his favorite book. He reads Mabel's kindness and mistakes it for permission. The town admires him the way towns admire anyone who can make an afternoon feel organized. Grunkle Stan sneers for sport and for warning both. He knows a hustle by the sound of the shoes it wears. Dipper feels the edges of the act and counts angles. Mabel tries to be fair. Fairness is her hobby. Fairness is also her hazard. Gideon invites. He gifts. He insists. He calls what he wants destiny, and what she wants confusion. The journal's second volume glints like a promised prize. In back rooms, contracts whisper to pens. On bright stages, boundaries must speak louder than microphones to be heard. Mabel says no, not as an argument, but as a blessing for both of them. A no that frees two people from a story that would have been written in a cramped hand. Gideon hears the syllable as if it were a dare. His smile does not fall, it sharpens. He finds new ways to circle the twins. Postcards, plans, leverage. He tries to take the shack the way a magician makes a coin disappear, hand over hand, distraction over demand. There are weeks where everything is a performance. Grunkle Stan parries with Barker's patter and the sturdiness of someone who knows real from stage steel. Dipper tracks. Journal 2 through rumors and dust. Mabel finds that love and boundaries are not enemies. They are partners who trade the microphone back and forth depending on the song. Gideon gets the book anyway. Of course he does. Some chapters want to be held by trouble for a while. He leads through power like a child flips pictures, fast, greedy, certain that knowing titles is the same as reading. The triangle in the margins likes this boy's ambition, the way a wind likes a kite with too much string. So many ways to tangle, so many chances to teach cut. Then comes the paper war, judges and deeds and the old shack temporarily out-argued by a child wearing a tie. The sign comes down. The lights click off. For a few evenings, the family sleeps without the comfort of their own walls. It is astonishing how quiet a town can feel when a gift shop isn't snoring. The lesson those nights teach is not despair. It is definition. What is the shack when you take away the building? It is people carrying the same jokes across a parking lot. It is a kitchen that can make pancakes on any hot surface. It is a porch wherever the four of them decide to look at stars from. The town notices. Towns always do. They begin gently to decide who has told the truer story about the building on the hill. The boy with the pen, or the man with the promise. As quickly as he rose, Gideon begins to shrink, not in size, but in scale. His gestures get bigger to make up for it. His plans grow pointy. His magic asks for help from corners it should not lean on. He looks up too often, toward a dream that will smile back with teeth he mistakes for applause. Mabel, merciful as always, keeps naming him correctly in her heart. Not villain, not prince, not fate. Kid. It keeps her gentle. It keeps her brave. And under the town's conversations, under the courtroom papers, under the tent, a rift in a bottle down in the basement makes a subtle sound, like glass, thinking about a song. Trouble has a way of synchronizing. It is not a conspiracy. It is a rhythm. Breathe. The tent lights go out. The stars above them don't. We keep walking. Some days, the house admits the truth the way a careful person finally admits a laugh. First in the eyes, then in the shoulders, then all at once. Morning arrives ordinary, dust in the sunbeam, pancakes that pretend to be faces. Stands grumble tuned to the cash register. But the basement hum is different, a note that expects to be answered. Somewhere in town, two suits notice a signal they have been waiting to notice. They follow it with their whole posture. They do not know this place. The place knows them. The day folds, and by afternoon the shack is a stage again, only no one is selling tickets. Agents speak in the tone of people who like rules more than stories. They see machines where Stan sees a promise. They see lies where the twins see secrets that kept them safe. Handcuffs make their small practice sound. Stan's face goes still in the way faces do when they are choosing which truth will do the least harm. Not what he seems, says a voice from the journal, and from the summer's edges and from the mirror that everyone avoids when they are tired. It is not an accusation. It is a betting line. The house takes a breath, long and deep enough to flicker every bulb. The kids do not accept frames that do not fit them. Dipper, calculator, and courage, both running hot, finds the path down. Mabel, who knows locks are sometimes just shy doors, finds how. Sue's, reliable as a heartbeat, is already where help needs to be. Between danger and the kids, between the past and the fallback plan, between panic and the next useful sentence. Blacklight-coated walls, a hatch that pretends to be a floor, a hallway that pretends to be a secret. Down they go to the room the house has been saving for this hour. The machine is waking, all coils and patience and held breath. The rift, once a theory in a bottle, is now a job no longer content with glass. The countdown is a kind of music. Numbers refuse to argue, they invite decisions. Dipper reads settings like prayers. He sees risks like landmarks. He sees even through the fog a shape that looks like home for someone who's been gone too long. Mabel sees a different math. Trust measured in summers, promises measured in pancake smiles, love measured in how often a person gets your name wrong and still means you. Upstairs Stan, the man who borrowed a name to keep a promise, stands under questions that have bad manners. He answers badly on purpose to slow the harm. He positions his body the way you move furniture to block a draft. He keeps the agents looking at the wrong map. He bleeds a little of his reputation out on the floor so the kids below can work without slipping. Everything that matters narrows to a lever and a moment in a sister's hand. The math says stop. The fear says stop. The law says stop. The summer says go. Dipper, bless him, tries to make everything true at once and nearly splinters. Mabel, who knows that sometimes the heart must pick a lane, chooses. She pulls. The machine becomes more than patient metal. The air becomes elsewhere and here braided together. The room without corners that has been haunting dreams since chalk met board takes one step into the basement and keeps its balance. Light folds. The portal finishes its old sentence. Ford steps through. He is tired in the way explorers are when the coast appears. He is whole in the way people are after being rearranged by the universe and putting themselves back with help. He looks first at the machine because language. Then he looks at the hand on the lever because miracle. Then he looks at Stan because brother. The agents lose the room the way law loses a story in which love has already made the verdict. Papers flutter. A gun chooses to be irrelevant. Nobody breathes properly for 3 entire seconds. Then the summer breathes for them. A long inhale of "we did it," and a longer exhale of "now what?" Upstairs, the shack looks the same. Sign, counter, bell. Down here, the lines have all redrawn themselves around a single fact. A promise kept. The hour is over. The chapter is not. Breathe. Quiet now, lantern low. The next part is a story told around a table with more listening than talking. Night is the best archivist. It takes a day, hums to it, and files it where it can be found again without waking the house. Tonight it brings out a box labeled "Before We Were Who We Are." They sit. 4 chairs, 2 brothers, 2 kids, a table that has hosted smaller revelations and is honored to hold this one. The room smells like solder and coffee and the faint evergreen of a valley that gets everywhere. The machine behind them is quiet, not out of respect, but because it is finally full. Stanford. The return speaks first in a voice that remembers both the dust motes in lecture halls and salt on mornings back east. His sentences are careful. They were trained that way. He begins at the shore where 2 boys learn to make thrift look like treasure. He names their boat and the way a plan can be a jacket that keeps you warm through winters that don't care about the calendar. He names the science fair, the scholarship, the handshake that separated one future into 2. He tells how brilliance, courted by a world eager to claim it, can end up alone in rooms that clap for it and still miss the point. He tells how a voice came to him at the hour when exhaustion puts a hand on your shoulder and how that voice praised and prodded until between felt more sensible than beyond. He does not say Bill loudly. He does not have to. The triangle is already listening from the margins of every story that includes ambition and sleep. He tells how he built and bordered and broke enough rules to feel the crack that became a rift. He tells how he cut a friendship out of his life like a rot, and discovered afterward that he had cut a root he still needed. He tells how he bottled what he could not heal. He tells how he wrote it all down in journals because sometimes ink can be a tourniquet. He tells finally of the day the machine became a door and of the fall that was not a fall, and of the years between frames that he spent learning how big a universe is when it does not agree to grids. He glosses the worst of it. There are children listening and a brother remembering. He makes a gentle joke at his own expense, and the room lets it stand the way a lighthouse allows a wave to slap its stones, acknowledged, uninjuring. Then Stanley, the man who wore his brother's name like armor and apron, fills the spaces Ford leaves blank with the other half. He talks in planks and nails and days measured by registers. He describes the first night after the fall when the workshop did not change its smell, as if the universe believed nothing had happened and dared him to contradict it. He describes learning the machine's language without the benefit of the accent that built it. He describes lies as a species of love, the ones you tell to keep a promise alive long enough to fulfill it. He does not make himself a hero. He makes himself stubborn. He makes himself present. He names Suze and Wendy and Mabel and Dipper as the reasons the whole plan did not turn him into a ghost who sold postcards to strangers. He admits to mistakes that wore boots, and the table forgives his boots because they walked where they were needed. The brothers argue a little even now. Old rhythms, familiar steps, a dance made of what if you had and why didn't you? But the edges are rounded. Mabel blinks heaviness out of the room's corners by listing 5 things she loves about each of them before anyone can interrupt. Dipper asks questions with the lens cap off his curiosity, and Ford answers in paragraphs that tuck explanation into comfort. There is a pause, the kind you only get when everyone at the table has told enough truth to rest. In that pause, the shack, this creaky museum, this lighthouse, this workshop disguised as a joke, makes a small sound as its beams settle into their new story. It is no longer a place that hides a secret. It is a place that hosts one. Secrets in hosts' clothing are kinder. From here forward, names are clean again. Ford signs his own pages. Stan signs his with his own underline. The kids keep both men honest with the polite cruelty of love. The town, which already knew more than it pretended, adjusts the angle of its smile by a single degree and keeps baking pies for the people up the hill. Outside, the night leans against the windows and listens as if at last it has been invited properly. The bell tower practices a morning chime it hasn't used in years, the one that means a lost thing is back. The river makes room in its song for a new stone. The forest touches very lightly the roof. And in a corner of the dreaming edges, a triangle that wanted a wedge feels the grain of the wood change under its pressure. It makes another note. It does not leave, but it understands that it will have to work now, not only whisper, breathe. We'll keep going soon. A rift named out loud. Trust tested. Wheels that almost turn. For now, 2 brothers, 1 table, 4 chairs, a silence that finally means home. Morning arrives with the smell of solder and apology. Ford moves through the shack like a man who has already memorized its floorboards from a distance. He touches the bench once, the way a traveler pats a rail to be sure the ship is real. He listens to the machine the way a good doctor listens to a heart. Eyes closed, head tilted, counting beats no one else can hear. There is a new object on the table that isn't new at all. A glass container built the way a prayer is built. Careful, exact, daring. Inside it, nothing, which is not the same as empty. The air bends minutely around it, as if the world were holding its breath near a cradle. When sunlight leans across the desk, it does a tiny detour, as though the ray had been taught manners. This, Ford says softly, and the room leans in, is a rift. Not a hole, not a tear. More like a decision the universe couldn't finish making. If it breaks, the rules take a day off. We don't want that day. He names conditions in the tone of a map. No shocks, no knocks, no experiments, no jokes within arm's reach. Dipper stands straighter, nodding like punctuation. Mabel nods too, but her eyes flick to the others' faces. She is already measuring how fear travels from person to person, and what small, soft words might catch it. Stan folds his arms in a fortress and pretends to be bored, which is the oldest way he knows to hide worry. Safety looks like a routine. Labels on drawers, foam under jars, a new lock on a door that already had 3. No, Ford writes procedures as if each line could carry the world's weight. Dipper volunteers to help and gets handed jobs that are real but bounded. A careful man giving tools to a careful boy in a way that lets both sleep at night. Mabel assigns herself the role of air breather in chief, someone to remind them to eat, to blink, to laugh at least once. because even heroes work better with oxygen. Privately, Friction takes a seat at the edge of the table. Ford carries a suitcase full of rules and reasons. Stan carries a summer full of risks taken for love. The two languages rhyme and still manage to argue. In the hallway, the twins hear voices rise and fall, not shouting exactly. Gravity having a conversation with momentum. The house is sturdy, it can host both. At night, Ford draws diagrams of the cipher wheel and crosses out half his own guesses. He circles symbols the way a tide circles rocks. The triangle in his margins watches him the way a smile watches a plan. Dipper studies beside him, careful not to jostle the bottle. He learns new words for old instincts: containment, resonance, threshold. He asks if the rift has feelings. Ford says no, then adds after a second, but it behaves as if it prefers not to be alone. Mabel feels another pressure, the kind that arrives when rooms fill with warning. It makes fun smaller. It shrinks colors. She refuses the shrink. She knits a cozy for a coffee mug shaped like a tiny sweater and slides it onto Ford's cup without asking permission. It is both a joke and a treaty. He pretends not to notice the treaty and keeps the mug forever. That is how some wars end. The rift becomes a housemate. Breakfast is eggs, toast, and please don't make sudden movements in the basement. Afternoon is errands and research and a quiet glance to check that the glass is still glass. Evening is a chessboard of tiny decisions. Who goes where? Who uses which outlet? Who sleeps, really sleeps, and who only pretends because the mind will not find the off switch. Ford tells the kids, gentle but firm, that curiosity needs a seatbelt. Dipper agrees in theory and bargains in practice for just a little more proximity to the machinery of understanding. Look from the doorway, Ford says, and Dipper does, learning to his surprise that you can see a lot from a threshold if you choose your questions carefully. Stan is a different sort of threshold. He grows prickly when Ford says never. He grows stubborn when Ford says alone. At the core of him is the sentence he can't stop saying, I kept this alive. At the core of Ford is the sentence he can't stop thinking, you kept this dangerous. They both mean I love you, and neither can pronounce it without bark on the edges. The kids translate. Families often need translators. The bottle hums. Sometimes the hum sounds like glass singing. Sometimes it sounds like a memory trying to be born. Once late, when all the lamps have made their little halos and sleep is prowling the hallway with bare feet, the rift flickers. It isn't light. It is possibility making faces against the window. Dipper inhales. Mabel places a hand on his sleeve. The moment passes because most of them do if you don't grab with both hands. Ford locks the door and pockets the key, and then, because he is not only a scientist, but a man who went very far and came back, he adds a second key to Mabel's palm. If I'm not here, he says, you aim for calm. She nods. She knows calm is a thing you practice, not a thing you own. Upstairs, the bell tower hears nothing and counts the hour anyway. The forest approves of labeling dangerous things. The river, which bottles itself every winter and breaks every spring, regards the little glass with kinship and caution. And in the margins of diagrams and in the long, thin places of sleep, a triangle tries versions of a sentence in the mirror and likes everyone. It will need a body. It will need a door. It will need a boy who wants a password more than he wants to rest. Breathe. The light dims. The bottle does not. We turn the page with 2 fingers and an inside voice. There is a week in every summer that feels like a theater building itself. Paper programs get folded. Stages get hammered together out of laughter and tape. Costumes bloom out of closets. Mabel is Joy's stage manager. She can see a spotlight in any room. Sock opera, she names it. And the town nods. Yes, that is what this week will be. Puppets are kinder than people, most days. They say the big feelings out loud and nobody flinches because felt is brave for us. Mabel threads strings with the help of friends, and suddenly a basement full of yarn and glitter becomes a city of tiny hearts, telling truths in voices pitched for comfort. Dipper nearby is solving a different kind of puzzle, a password too stubborn for ordinary guesses. The journal sits open like a friend who wants to help but can't say how yet. The computer blinks its indifferent little cursor. Between them, the rift hums under the floor like a warning a radio can't quite tune. Fatigue is a door left on the latch. Bill knows latches. The dream that finds Dipper has the soft wrongness of a lullaby, sung slightly off-key. The voice is friendly the way a reflection is friendly. It nods when you do. It offers help. It always offers help. Deal is only a word, and words don't break anything when they fit so very well. A signature in sleep. A wink in a corner no one else can see. A swap so quick the air forgets it happened. Suddenly the boy is on the outside of his own eyes, and something with angles for bones is wearing him like a well-tailored jacket. We do not linger here in fear. We walk it gently because even a bad lesson can be learned softly. Bill and Dipper smiles with borrowed teeth and uses Dipper's voice to say sentences Dipper would never say. Tilted, exact, aimed. He wants something old and bright and bottled, and he wants it now. He hunts keys and codes and exits. He picks up Mabel's puppet and almost makes a joke with it, and the room itself seems to frown. Mabel knows her brother's cadence the way sailors know the shore by smell. She feels the wrongness, not a thunderbolt, more like a single instrument, out of tune in a band she's heard 100 times. She tries love first. Then she tries humor. Then she tries help, which is the sharpest tool in her kit. You're tired, she says to the boy with her brother's face. You're rushing. This is how you talk to storms. The ruse holds long enough to be dangerous and not long enough to win. Dipper inside scrabbles for levers. He has help. From memories that refuse to be overwritten. From names spoken in a hurry. From a pig who learned to nap exactly where he will be tripped over. And from Mabel, who keeps talking as if the person she loves can hear her, because he can. We visit the mindscape only as much as needed, a place of triangles and sharp shadows where a boy who has learned to be careful must now learn to be certain. Bill has all the clever. Dipper brings choice. In the end, it is not a trick that saves him. It is a decision. My body is mine. My name is mine. My sister is mine to stand with, not to use. The sentence is stronger than geometry. Bill is evicted with exactly as much ceremony as you give a bad tenant who violated the lease. After, there is shaking. The body's way of wringing out leftover lightning. There is apology. The mind's way of sweeping up glitter no broom will ever entirely collect. There is forgiveness, Mabel's habit, and Stan's secret talent, and Sousa's native language. And there are new rules. Ford's gift, firm but not cruel. Protect your sleep, ward your work. Let someone you love check your eyes before you go near anything that has ever tried to own you. The show goes on. Of course it does. Puppets sing. The audience laughs. The curtains swish like friendly waves. Mabel watches Dipper from the wing and sees him steady himself, hand on the flat, breath in the belly, eyes bright. He bows at the end, a fraction smaller than he might have a week ago, humble in a way victory makes you when it cost you a little. But he bows. The town applauds twice, once for the songs and once, secretly, for a family that chose togetherness in a room where loneliness was auditioning. That night, Ford chalks symbols on thresholds and nails a charm over the workshop like a star punched in tin. He teaches the kids to recognize the feeling of a pressure change in conversation. The way a compliment can tip into leverage. The way advice can tilt into control. He jokes because he has learned the hard way to leaven warnings with warmth, that they should beware of triangles offering tech support. Dipper smiles. Mabel draws a triangle with eyelashes and tapes it to the fridge labeled, "No thank you." The laugh is real, so is the lesson. Downstairs, the rift is no wiser about what almost happened, but the air in the room remembers. It is grateful for locks and for love and for the very human trick of turning fear into craft. Upstairs, the twins sleep with the lights off and the door open, and the house watching over them the way places do when they decide you belong. Breathe. The worst of that weather is past. The next days will be about a lifting fog, not losing names. There are towns that keep their secrets in basements. Gravity Falls, kindly and strange, kept one of its biggest secrets in the open, disguised as forgetfulness. It was a blanket folded for guests, placed on the back of every chair. If something frightened you, tuck it in. If a night was too sharp, tuck it in. If a friend looked at you with a history you couldn't carry, tuck it in. The blanket had a club behind it. A kind-hearted origin turned careful habit, turned ritual with robes. The Society of the Blind Eye wrote minutes, stamped papers, filed memories away as if they were overdue books, and believed they were helping. Many were. Many also weren't. A good intention used too often without breath becomes a mask that fits a little too well. The twins find a thread and pull. A symbol repeats on old posters in alley chalk, in the way some shop signs seem to avoid looking at their own reflections. McGucket, who has always felt like a man standing in his own fog with a lantern he built out of spare parts, flinches when certain words walk through a conversation. Mabel takes his hand. Dipper takes notes. They follow the symbol to rooms with polite chairs. The discovery is not a raid. It is a meeting in the kindest sense of the word. A projector clicks. Files sigh open. Names remember themselves in sequences that make people's shoulders drop. Oh, that's why. The society, confronted not by anger but by understanding, loses the stiffness in its posture. A rule said aloud in the wrong light can hear itself and step aside. They stop using the device. That is the first mercy. Then they turn it on themselves carefully, guided by the kids, to return what should never have been collected. Memories come back like birds, some glad, some startled, some loud, some content to perch and preen. People cry a little and laugh more and tell stories they thought were dreams and discover that dreams will forgive the confusion. In the middle of it stands McGucket, hat brim trembling, hands brave. The return memories bring pain because that's honest, but they also bring context. And context cuts the thorns off certain vines. He sees his younger self, gentle, brilliant, eager. And he sees the machine that scared his goodness into corners. He sees the society he built to keep a town from breaking on truths it wasn't ready to hold. And he sees how ready the town has become with time and company. He looks at the kids and finds steady ground. He stands up straighter. He keeps his hat. He keeps the lantern. The fog thins. The town changes 1 degree. People who used to shrug at lights in the woods now say, "Oh, yes, Tuesday?" and set an extra place at supper for a neighbor late from chasing a rumor. The bell tower sounds clearer, as if it has been tuned by someone who remembered how. A few arguments happen, because not all truths sit down neatly, but they are better argument, done under daylight with pie. Dipper closes his notebook on a page titled, We don't have to forget to live, and underlines it twice. Not because he will forget, but because the underlines look like a promise. Mabel draws a blindfold on a smiley face and then draws the blindfold sliding up like a headband. She tapes it to the projector with a flourish. Even the room chuckles. The device, that humming forgetter, that mercy-turned habit, gets carried away like a heavy table everyone has their hand under. It will be kept as a warning, not a weapon. The society disbands in the softest possible way. Coffee instead of ceremonies, farewells instead of vows, addresses exchanged in case anyone needs help remembering on purpose about small things like birthdays and big things like names. The valley breathes out. It prefers towns that can look themselves in the eye. The forest, which remembers everything, whether it wants to or not, rustles in approval. The river, which forgets nothing but rearranges everything, nods along. And far away, in a room without corners, an angle sharpens very slightly. Truth returning is inconvenient to creatures who depend on fog. The triangle adjusts its plan the way a chess player adjusts to a board where some pawns have started telling each other jokes. Breathe. The air is clearer now. The path ahead is visible, which makes the next test honest, even if it won't be easy. A house can wear armor, not the clanking kind, wards, charms, lines of chalk that mean do not, rings of salt that mean not here. After possession, after fog lifting, after diagrams of wheels and whispers about rifts, Ford proposes armor. The shack, which has been a stage and a shop and a lighthouse and a family, agrees to try being a fortress. He draws symbols, he knows many. He mixes inks that stain like intention. He explains theory in paragraphs that end with, "Please be careful." Dipper helps, delighted to put math on the walls in a way that actually hums. Stan watches, skeptical in the way of men who have survived via gut more than chalk. The two brothers' old argument puts on new costumes. Protocol versus practical, paranoia versus prudence. It isn't war, it's weather. Some protections require more than chalk. They require virtue, that old word that gets dusty on shelves, but still opens doors. "We need a unicorn here," Ford says, and the room goes quiet in the way rooms do when fairy tales get real enough to requisition supplies. Mabel volunteers before the sentence is finished. She knows a quest when it taps the table. She gathers friends the way a magnet gathers paper clips. Grenda, candy, a backpack full of snacks, optimism, and glue. They follow a map that is mostly vibes. The forest, pleased by their company, shows them the path with sun patches and the smell of wild mint. The unicorn, they find, is beautiful in the way judgment is beautiful. Clean lines, bright mane, a gaze that has spent a lifetime inspecting. It calls for a test in a voice that does not rise above polite. Pure of heart, it says. And the words feel like a scale you can stand on if you take off your shoes. The tests are absurd, which does not make them harmless. Riddles with answers that punish honesty. Chores that feel like performance. Moral mazes built to trip the very people they claim to measure. Mabel fails them, because the test is aimed at a picture of goodness, not goodness itself. Her face falls, not because she's failed, but because she wanted the town to be safer, and this was supposed to help. Then comes the lesson that makes the whole day worth the climb. Purity is not a stamp you carry. It is a practice you return to when you wander. Candy offers science and friendship as counterweights. Brenda offers a voice that refuses to be small. Together, they do not cheat so much as correct the test. "We're not perfect," Mabel says, shoulders back, hands open. "We're trying." The forest approves. The unicorn, caught between ceremony and truth, snorts and yields a mane hair the way a cloud yields shade, grudgingly, generously, both. Back at the shack, the hair becomes part of the armor, threaded through a ward above the door, tied into a knot that remembers hands. The house feels it immediately, a new weight, like a shawl thrown over shoulders at the first hint of rain. Ford nods, not smiling exactly, but relieved in the way of men who have run out of contingencies and found one more anyway. Meanwhile, paranoia wanders the halls in Stan's boots. He doesn't like how the protections make the place look like a math problem. He doesn't like how Ford grips the Rift bottle like a man holding a baby near stairs. He doesn't like how the kids keep being asked to be brave in ways that grow them faster than summer should. He says as much loudly. Ford answers quietly that he cannot unknow what he knows. The two stances touch and spark. The kids become translators again. Dipper finds a page where protocol reads like courage and brings it to Stan. Here's where we do it your way and the safe way. Mabel finds a way to decorate a sigil so it looks like a friend instead of a threat. She tapes googly eyes to a particularly stern charm until it seems less likely to scold passers-by. The serious magic holds. The house laughs under its breath. This is armor that fits a family. The unicorn lesson folds into everything. Mabel walks differently for a day, hurt a little, wiser more. She asks herself small questions. Did I help? Did I listen? Did I leave a place brighter? When she answers yes and no and almost, she does not crown or condemn herself. She plans next time. That is how a heart stays clean in a town that loves mud. Ford sleeps at a table again. Stan sleeps in the chair near the door, guarding nothing in particular. Suze tests the new wards with a sandwich and pronounces them hoagie-proof, which is not in the literature, but probably important. Wendy perches on the roof where the chalk lines meet the sky and says it looks cool, which is its own kind of approval. Downstairs, the rift vibrates like a glass someone just ran a finger around. The protection sings back. For now, that is enough. For now, the triangle knocks at the walls of rules and finds them solid. It revises its sentence again. It will need timing. It will need a fear. It will need a choice that feels like mercy and cracks like ice. Breathe. The armor is on. The sky is steady. The next page has weight, but we will lift it together very slowly with both hands. There are days that tilt like a tray you thought was level. Nothing spills at first. Then a single glass begins to slide. It starts kindly. Ford offers Dipper a word that sounds like an award and behaves like a magnet. Apprentice. He means it as a door opened wide. Maps, stars, machines that listen. A life of careful wonder. Dipper's heart lifts the way paper lifts in a breeze. He says yes in all the small ways. A straighter back. A pencil ready. A look that tries not to brag. The journal sits nearby, pleased to be a beginning instead of a warning for once. On the same morning, a different tray tilts in Mabel's hands. The town is full of end-of-summer voices. Goodbyes practicing in doorways, sweaters deciding whether to stay folded. Next year starts arriving in sentences like weather. A Summerween box gets taped shut. A friend mentions school in a tone that can't help sounding like a train schedule. Growing up, that patient friend she's always happy to have outrun with a joke catches her eye and asks for a slower dance. She tries to oblige. The room seems to step away. Dipper, bursting with news he's not sure how to hold, tells her about the apprenticeship as if handing her a constellation to share. She hears it as a subtraction. Not because she doesn't love his yes, but because it sounds like a door closing somewhere, indoors that she cannot see. We always, she wants to say. And the future answers, sometimes. That gap is small. Small gaps are where big things slip. Into the space between always and sometimes walks a voice in a borrowed suit. It knows how to sound helpful from behind a familiar face. It suggests a way to make the ache stop. It says no change in a tone that feels like mercy. It points gently toward the rift in a bottle, toward a wish that would freeze the clock long enough for a heart to breathe. Mabel, tired from carrying a whole summer of togetherness, reaches for the promise the way you reach for a railing in the dark. Glass decides to be glass. It does what it is best at. It breaks. The sound is not loud, it is exact. The room inhales without choosing to. Light bends and then forgets how to bend back. Lines around objects begin to disagree with the objects. A scent like a storm that studied geometry moves through the shack and out into town. Rules, those quiet servants that keep chairs from floating and colors from arguing, take a holiday. On the horizon, a shape that has practiced introductions for centuries steps over. The triangle that prefers to smile with teeth in the corners lays a hand on the world like a claim. Weirdmageddon is just a long word for the day the curtain forgot it was supposed to stay up. No one faints. Stan swears softly, the way a captain does when a wave shows off. Ford grips the table, already measuring the damage with eyes that hate being right. Dipper looks for Mabel first and finds instead a bubble over the forest. A shimmer that feels like a child closing her eyes tightly and wishing. The town flickers. Buildings yawning. Signs blinking too slowly. Streets rearranging to fit new ideas of straight. Then the house remembers its armor. Chalk sings, charms wake. The unicorn hair glows with the satisfaction of a rule being obeyed. The mystery shack, shop, lighthouse, workshop, family, adds a new noun to its collection. Refuge. People run toward it because people run toward together when the map goes abstract. We make a promise in this telling. We will keep the terror on a short leash. We will not stare into teeth. We will describe choices and hands finding hands and rooms remembering what they're for. Under that promise, the day continues. Gideon, hired by something he doesn't understand to guard Mabel's bubble, paces with his heart in his mouth and finds that the view into someone else's wish makes his own wishes feel strange. Wendy counts heads without looking like she is counting. Sue steadies doors as if steadiness were a profession. McGucket arrives with a toolbox full of disasters and the ability to laugh at most of them. The bell tower rings a note it has never played and hopes it sounds like we're still here. We get Mabel, Dipper says, and no one argues, because priorities like that do not require committees. Breathe. The world is wobbly, but the floor under our feet is a room full of people who like each other. That is the best kind of floor. Daylight wears new clothes. Triangles float like polite balloons with opinions. Fish decide walking is worth a try. Colors practice being louder. Bill, we will name him now because he has stopped whispering, stretches in the open and greets the town like a host who never needed invitations. He builds a throne that looks like a joke a nightmare told, and sits as if he invented sitting. The shack holds. Its walls remember purpose. People gather under rafters that know their names. Ford draws a fast map. Safe zones here, watch there. Do not touch that no matter how much it asks. Stan organizes without pretending it's his first time. Jobs, rotations, snacks, morale. He makes 2 bad jokes in a row, and the room laughs too hard because the alternative is to think about outside. Outside, Gideon patrols the edge of Mabel's bubble. He is supposed to keep people away. He does for a while because orders are blankets you can pull over your head when thinking hurts. But Dipper and Wendy and Suze reach the fence with pleas in their hands instead of weapons, and pleas has always been Gideon's weakness. He folds. He admits he has been guarding what he misses most, a world where someone smiled at him without a price. He steps aside, not with defeat, but with relief. The bubble itself hums like a song a child hums to comfort herself. It is a perfect Mabel dreamed by a tired Mabel. Cotton candy skies, all problems solved with sprinkles, all clocks with friendly faces. Reality calls that denial when it is unkind. We will call it rest. She needed rest. She made a place where change was politely asked to wait in the hall. To reach her, the three step through an edge that behaves like water that learned manners. Inside, their feet do not precisely touch ground. Inside, gravity is more of a suggestion. Inside, logic visits only if invited. They find Mabelland, and it finds them back. Wendy, with her talent for standing in exactly the right spot, becomes the anchor. Suze, with his talent for seeing the kid in everyone, becomes the translator. Dipper, with his new habit of choosing, becomes the knock on a door that has been shut for a good reason and needs the gentlest hello. They do not argue. They do not scold. They remember out loud. They remember stairs creaking in rhythm and midnight kitchen water and the way fear feels smaller when your sister is nearby. Mabel listens with eyes that have been on vacation. She looks at perfect and feels the small itch it always hides. She looks at real and feels the ache it cannot help wearing. Then she looks at Dipper, the version who will say yes to an apprenticeship and still choose her hand. And she makes the bravest decision a heart can make. She leaves the nap. The bubble lets them go because good rest releases you when you've had enough. Outside, the air is the same and not. Bill lifts his hat in mockery. Mockery is a hat he never takes off. The shack doors open, and a cheer spills out that is mostly thank goodness and a little what now. A family is reassembled with its dents showing and is stronger for the dents. Night comes. The town glows in the wrong colors. Stars consider learning new constellations to match. The shack sleeps in shifts. Ford tests the warding and finds it holding. Stan snores with the bravery of people who will wake if a mouse thinks too loud. Mabel holds waddles like a talisman. Dipper dreams cautiously and finds only his own voice there. That is a victory large enough to make a bed feel like a raft. Breathe. Morning will be used for building. The plan will be messy, which is how you know it's alive. We have visited. We return briefly to gather the lesson and tuck it in a pocket. Mabelland was not a villain. It was a bandage applied by a girl who has excellent aim. It healed what it could. Noise, pressure, the grief of later. And like all bandages, it needed to be changed before it stuck to the wound. When Dipper arrived, he did not rip. He soaked the edges with story and trust until the bandage let go by itself. That is medicine you can be proud of. Gideon learned something too. Guarding is not the same as caring. One controls, the other considers. He moved from one to the other with a clumsy grace that made the day better. He looked at Mabel's wish and recognized his own, not for cotton candy, but for forgiveness. He did not get all the way there in one afternoon. No one does. He started. In times like these, a start is architecture. The three who entered the bubble came out carrying permission. To be sad about endings and glad about beginnings at the same time. To choose each other even when paths fork. To laugh in rooms where plans are written, because laughter keeps pens from breaking. Bill did not mind the rescue. He believed in inevitability the way Rivers believed downhill is a personality. He thought plans could be tightened around hope like a belt. He underestimated this hope, the kind that does not argue or predict, but remembers and shows up. We placed that lesson on the table next to the maps and blueprints and sandwiches. We will need it very soon. Breathe. Take a sip of water. Stretch your hands. The last act of a storm is often the quietest on the page and the loudest in the heart. Morning with Purpose smells like coffee and pencil shavings. The shack becomes a shipyard. Plans are stacked not in piles but in teams. Shelter, scouting, signal, surprise. Sue's names screws like pets, and they behave better for it. Wendy climbs, points, says there, and a beam arrives as if the house itself wanted to be here all along. McGucket invents things faster than nouns can keep up. Some of them work, and the ones that don't become parts for the ones that do. The town, people who yesterday were customers, become crew. They build something that is not quite a machine and not quite a miracle. A moving house with a spine made of friendship and a skin made of every good joke the shack ever told. We will not dwell on its shape. We will only say that home stood up and took a step, and the ground approved. The march to Bill's seat is a procession of refusals. No to despair. No to arithmetic that forgets to count togetherness. No to a voice that says inevitable, as if it were a spell. Bill answers with tricks and thresholds, with gravity turned sideways, with flattery sharpened into hooks. The house shakes off praise as easily as it shakes off debris. Praise for one person is fine. Praise that tries to separate people is not. At the foot of the impossible pyramid, architecture that thinks highly of itself, our crew plants their feet. Ford reveals the cipher wheel not as a toy, but as old math carved in rumor. 12 symbols, 12 souls, a circle that, if it holds, might make even an angle pause. The town rings itself around the symbols like a choir. Hands touch because circles prefer hands. It almost works. Almost is a powerful word. It has stopped wars and started songs. Here almost fails because 2 points on the circle are tied to a history that still has splinters. Stan and Ford, asked by the wheel to agree, manage instead to remember the versions of each other that hurt. The circle breaks the way a sentence breaks when 2 people keep talking at once. Bill applauds, as he always does when people say no to themselves. He folds the heroes into a prison that is really a waiting room for despair. He talks the way only certainty talks. He gloats, which is a fancy way of saying he fails to imagine that hearts can invent one more idea when nothing is left on the shelf. The idea comes out of a family, which is where the last ideas always hide. Ford, who understands rules, suggests using one in a new way. Stan, who understands fighting, offers the one thing he trusts more than his fists, himself. They change places. Names and faces swapped with a nod that does not try to be sentimental and therefore becomes the most sentimental thing. Bill, greedy for Ford's mind, understands instead. There, in a room with a vending machine and 1,000 memories taped to its sides, tricks fail and a reset waits. We handle this gently. A device built long ago for mercy becomes mercy again. A mind is asked to let go to save everyone it holds. Stan, gruff, stubborn, secretly soft as a biscuit, agrees. It is the bravest agreement in a summer full of them. The memory gun hums and then sings. Bill learns that erasure can be a door that doesn't open. He unravels like a knot that finally heard the right sentence. The pyramid forgets it ever wanted to be a pyramid and sits down like a tired idea. Silence happens. A silence that tastes like defeat for the villain and grief for the cost. Stan blinks and does not know why everyone is looking at him like a photograph you thought you'd lost. Mabel says his name in the tone you use with someone who just woke from a long nap in a strange chair. Dipper holds a hat and cannot quite make his hands let go. Ford stands very still because sometimes stillness is the only respect big enough. Then the work of love begins. You reintroduce a man to his own laugh. You hand him objects that used to know his hands and let the muscle remember. You tell stories not as history lectures, but as bedtime tales. Because bedtime is where truths go to be gentle. You wait without tapping your foot. You cook the pancakes the way he taught you by yelling instructions from the other room. You keep the chair warm he likes. You let him find you instead of waving your arms forever. Memory is shy sometimes. It returns sideways, a smell, a joke, a debt remembered, a dance step the legs do before the mind can name it. In small pieces, then bigger ones, Stan returns to himself the way a town returns to normal after it has learned a new definition for normal. Ford gets a hug that lands like an anchor and an apology for every plank that ever hit the wrong nail. He gives one back. Brothers are mirrors when they are well again. As for Bill, the gold thread that kept trying to pull the entire tapestry out through a single stitch, he is gone in the way bad ideas go. Not with a bang we will relive at night, but with a lesson we will keep. The wheel did not turn. The family did. That was enough. Outside, the sky remembers its colors. The bell tower, which never stopped counting, rings a note that sounds like homework postponed and porches swept and pie cooling. The shack leans a little, the way buildings do after strenuous days, and then finds its old angle. Breathe. We will wake up with the town in a moment. We will sweep. We will fix. We will remember. And we will say goodbye the way Gravity Falls prefers, not as an ending, but as a season you can visit whenever you close your eyes and let the pines do the talking. Morning is always smaller than a storm. That is how it wins. Sunlight arrives in reasonable rectangles on floors that spend a night forgetting what straight meant. The bell tower tries a test note and hears itself ring back from an ordinary sky. Pine needles, which do not care for drama, shine with a plain wetness and get on with being pine needles. People step out of their doors in twos, shoulder to shoulder, because that is how nerves like to walk. They look up, down, and around. They say each other's names in the way you do after a long trip, even if the trip never left town. Boards go up over windows that learn new shapes and want time to remember their old ones. Brooms appear as if from a pocket dimension. Sweeping begins. Small sounds, sweeps, taps, the pause before a nail goes in, reclaim the air from last night's vocabulary. At the shack, coffee tastes like repair. The room looks the way a face looks after crying and sleeping. Softer, honest, awake. Stan sits with a towel around his neck as if memory returns better to a warm body. Ford talks in paragraphs with commas instead of exclamation points, building the morning back with grammar. Dipper writes labels for unlabelable events so the day can file them. Mabel, who understands glue and love her cousins, tapes a fresh family picture to a wall still bruised from last week. The tape makes a sound like a decision. Suze makes eggs in a pan that remembers how. He slides a plate toward Stan. "You like 'em this way," he says, and waits, heart in his mouth. A second, a smell. Stan eats, then smirks, his first one back. "Not bad, kid." And a small cheer rolls through the kitchen, disguised as everyone suddenly needing water. Wendy brings hammer, nails, and the correct shrug. She patches roof lines like conversation. Short, direct, funny when needed. McGucket wheels up a cart of devices whose labels are either optimistic or nervous. Several work perfectly. The ones that don't become artwork for the gift shop window with tags that read, "Unstable but cute." And that suits everyone. The town is not pretending nothing happened. It is choosing what to remember loudly. A chalkboard outside the diner reads, "Pancakes for everyone who fought a geometric nightmare." And on the next line in smaller letters, "Or who made coffee for someone who did." A telephone pole gathers flyers. Lost cat found self. Found bike, now a fish, please advise. Laughter shows up like a volunteer and is assigned the job of carrying heavy things. Some apologies need saying. Gideon, hat in hand, stands at the shack's doorframe and looks smaller than his stage ever let him be. He speaks without mic or costume. The apology is not a short one. Apologies rarely are when they're right. Mabel listens like a friend and like a guardrail at the same time. Do better, she says, not unkindly. He nods like someone who has met a map. Later that week, he'll be seen painting a fence that didn't ask, and no one will tell him to stop. Pacifica arrives with sleeves rolled, hair tied back, and a face set to learn. She swings a hammer as if it might swing back. It doesn't. She keeps swinging anyway. The Northwest House opens doors to people it once kept out, and that's what fixes the creaks. The Society of the Blind Eye meets once more, not to erase, but to archive. They box up their robes, label the box History, handle with care, and donate the projector to the school with a note that says, use for movies only. It's taped directly to the lens in case temptation is bigger than memory. Ford quietly rewrites the first page of a brand new journal, this time with a different pronoun. We. He draws the cipher wheel again, lightly, like a bruise sketch. Then he draws a boat, heavier, with a grin that has teeth in the right places. Stan leans over his shoulder and snorts. You can't draw boats, he says. Ford hands him the pencil. Stan adds a childish flag with a skull wearing glasses. Better, he says. Now it's ours. There are practicalities. Insurance wants names for things that don't like being named. The town clerk invents a column labeled Acts of whatever that was, and allows people to describe damages in their own handwriting. Claims get processed. Checks get printed. No one writes Weirdmageddon. The town agrees on the incident because it is easier to say in grocery lines. And there are rituals. Boards covered in thank you notes go up in the square. To the shack, to the bell ringer, to the kid who gave his socks to someone whose shoes were briefly snakes. On the back of one card in crayon is a triangle with X eyes and a tongue sticking out. Even paper knows how to be brave when children teach it. Near the edge of the woods, a statue appears, stone wearing a familiar grin, as if a joke decided to petrify rather than fade. People look. Some take pictures. Most simply walk by the way you pass an old billboard after it stops selling anything. A few out-of-towners try to start a game about it. The town doesn't bite. That is the game. At day's end, pines sing their small, reliable song. The river, pleased to report that gravity still applies, tells stones what they already knew. The shack turns its sign from open to closed with a gesture that looks suspiciously like a wink. Everything is not fixed. Everything is held. That is enough for a morning after. Breathe. One more plank. One more nail. One more name remembered out loud. Good. Farewells are simply beginnings with better manners. Still, they tug. The morning of the bus, the town wears its good jacket. The road up to the stop has been swept, then swept again. The bell tower waits for the hour and then cheats by ringing a little early. Protocol can make exceptions when hearts are involved. Mabel packs decisively, and then unpacks twice to tuck in things that are not things. A note from Candy. A rock shaped like a heart that only she can see as a heart. A drawing from Grenda labeled Sweater's Rule. She ties a bow on the summer, and it holds. Dipper refolds the journal page he's allowed to keep. A photocopy, blessed by Ford, labeled For the Road, Caution plus Wonder, and slides it into the front of a new notebook that is not magic, and that is exactly why it will be. He tests a pen. It works. He tests a compass. It points home for an extra second before remembering north. Stan aims for Gruff and lands on Misty around the eyes. He handles this by telling 3 jokes in a row and pretending to trip, so the hug that follows can be blamed on physics. He gives Dipper a flashlight that has seen things and still likes the dark. He gives Mabel a key on a chain. To nothing. But it opens everybody, he says, tapping her heart. Then his own, then missing, and tapping his shirt pocket, which makes everyone laugh exactly as long as he needs them to. Ford arrives with a bundle wrapped in something that looks like oilcloth in ceremony. Inside, a map annotated in a hand that fights and loses against neatness. He adds one last mark with a pencil. A small pine tree near the spot labeled home. Come back, he says, as if it were an instruction to Weather, and for once, Weather obeys. Wendy slings a small duffel onto Mabel's shoulder and says, for when you run away to join the Roofers' Union. Inside are gloves, a lucky nail, and a photograph of the roof at sunset, with 2 shadows waving. Saos presents an official certificate, honorary assistant to the assistant manager, lifetime, signed with 3 different pens and a 4th flourish. It comes with a coupon. 1 free panic calming, no questions asked. The bus exhale hisses into place like a dragon that learned manners. The driver looks at Waddles and lifts an eyebrow. Mabel lifts 2. Medical support pig, she says, deadpan. The driver has seen Stranger this year and waves them on. Waddles climbs the steps with a grunt that sounds like continuity. Goodbyes clump at the doors because no one wants them on the gravel. Hugs become a kind of language. Dipper and Mabel promise return in 5 different synonyms. Soon, again, next time, you'll see. And of course, Stan and Ford promise letters and then, in the same breath, admit they are bad at letters. Pictures then, Mabel says, and hands them a disposable camera with stickers on it that make it work better somehow. The bus takes its time, as if reluctant to disturb the stillness that is gathered for this purpose. It rolls, hands wave, hats lift, eyes shine. The last turn steals the shack from view. A new line on the map unfolds. Inside the bus, there is quiet, not sad, just full. Mabel rests her cheek on Waddles and does the math of friendships that stretch. Dipper stares out the window and traces the shapes of trees into sentences. They nudge shoulders. That is a vow. Back on the hill, the shack adjusts its sign. Under new management hangs crooked on purpose because that is the brand. So's will do fine. He already is. Wendy takes the stool at the counter and teaches it how to be a throne. Stan and Ford stand not side by side, but shoulder against shoulder, in a way that suggests both are thinking about a water. That afternoon, a boat with a patched hull and a loud name slides into the river. The Stan War II is not subtle. It is not supposed to be. Stan throws a rope. Ford ties a knot that holds. They climb aboard. 2 brothers, 2 oars, 1 horizon. Somewhere on that horizon is between. This time they'll visit together. The bus hums. The road unwinds. The valley shrinks into a word the heart can carry without strain. Home. Breathe. We'll check on everyone once more before the lights go out. Summer does not end so much as file itself. Sue's now in a cap that says boss, in letters that fight with a hat for space, runs the shack with a generosity that makes even the dust feel welcome. Tours are a little longer because he likes making sure everyone got the joke. He installs a bench near the gift shop labeled, "For when you need to sit with your feelings." It is often occupied and always helpful. Wendy keeps the roof honest. She schedules bonfires with no reason attached because reason is optional and marshmallows aren't. She teaches younger kids how to swing a hammer without hitting what you love. They learn fast. Hammers listen to her. Pacifica practices a new family tradition, showing up. She appears with pies whose crusts look apologetic and taste bold. She volunteers badly at first, at places where volunteering used to be something her parents donated instead. Doing the thing beats announcing the thing. She learns that quickly and on purpose. Gideon works from the outside in. He stops performing long enough to hear a complete sentence from someone else. He finds that small, honest work, like repainting a fence or holding a door, changes the posture of a day. He still loves applause. He loves approval more. Approval doesn't echo, it stays. McGucket collaborates with the high school on a safety-first and weird science fair. The projects include a toaster that only burns exactly one side, a helmet that remembers dreams in polite fragments, and a squirrel-proof feeder that the squirrels enjoy anyway. He laughs every time and writes, "Iterate," in red on every poster. Blendon returns once, embarrassed and grateful, to clean up a pocket of leftover Tuesday that keeps occurring behind the post office. He tips his cap to the bell tower. The bell tower nods. That seems sufficient for both. In a diner booth, Sheriff Blubbs and Deputy Derlin try to write a report titled "Things We Did Right," and end up making a scrapbook. They are correct to do so. On the river, Stan and Ford send postcards that look like cryptograms until Mabel holds them to the light and reads them as plain joy. Found a fish that quotes poetry. It was snobby, 10/10. Saw a sky that made me believe in triangles again, the good kind. Sometimes there's only a drawing. 2 stick figures in a boat, a sun that takes up half the page. That drawing is the best one. Somewhere off a highway at a rest stop called The Last Decent Milkshake. The twins stop on a future road trip and find a bumper sticker with pine trees that looks like home without saying it. They stick it under the window in their room back home. The sticker points left. That is enough to make you smile before sleeping. As months stretch, little mysteries continue to happen at a safe volume. A mailbox that predicts rain by refusing to open. A scarecrow that actually scares crows but insists on being thanked. A cat that delivers one glove from a pair you lost in 7th grade. Each one fits into the town's day like a button that finally found its coat again. The statue in the woods gathers moss, and then, one spring, in a nest. A family of birds raises a family of birds on a stone that once tried to be a headline. The chicks learn to fly early. This is how stories lose their teeth and keep their shape. Every so often, a visitor comes to the shack and asks, "Is it true?" The answer is always, "Some of it," said with a smile that invites the person to pick which parts matter. Truth here is a team sport. Everyone gets to score. And so the season learns to fold itself back onto the shelf it came from. Not dusty, not sealed, just ready. Breathe. One more candle, one more page, one more good night. The Triangle wanted to teach a town that cleverness wins. The summer taught the Triangle that care does. It would be easy to end on the bus exhaust and the vanishing taillights, but that is not how Gravity Falls behaves. This town is a place you can visit by listening. Close your eyes and the pines will start. A hiss that is also a hush, a language for which breathing is the only dictionary. If you listen longer, the river speaks in present tense. Going, 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 and always here. The bell offers time as a kindness, not a countdown. If you tilt your head, you can hear the shack settling for the night. Wood answering wood, glass answering wind. A pig deciding exactly where to be heavy. The roof remembers footsteps. The gift shop dreams in inventory, which is just a hug with price tags. Somewhere a journal closes itself with a soft yes. We have walked in order as promised. Founding myths, 2 brothers a summer, a sky that broke and healed, a bus. We watched a rift learn restraint, and a family learn the art of changing together. We watched friends step into their best sizes. We left a statue to the birds. We kept the door open. If tonight you fall asleep before the last line, that is a good ending too. The story is patient. It will keep until you come back. When you do, we'll start at the same place, under the pines, with time opening like a small, brave hand. Take one last breath in this valley, in through the nose, out through the mouth. Hear the pages of the summer turn and then settle. Feel the chair, the blanket, the ordinary miracle of lungs working without chores attached. Let your eyes get heavy. Let the world shrink to river, bell, wind, and needles. Good night from Gravity Falls. The pines will whisper the rest.